Review, a podcast with one eye, always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Subchaktai-Banker. And what matters most to me? My friends. Allow me to introduce my two co-hosts for today. He's a mind-reading, shape-shifting incarnation of chaos. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
We live and die in the shadows for those we hold close and for those we never meet. It's going well, Jen. How are you?
It's so cryptic. It's going great. And his life will always matter more to me than my own. It's Greg Cass. How are you doing, Greg?
Our lives are the sum of our choices. We cannot escape the past. Ethan, this mission of yours is going to cost you dearly.
That was a really good reenactment of the trailer.
It was.
That's like half
also,
the trailer.
PT stole my quote, and so I quickly...
Oh, you had to pivot. Good work.
And I feel bad. I was going to go with No One Is Safe from Phineas Freak, but I was like, that's really obscure when Luther starts referring to himself as Phineas Freak. Spoiler.
Yeah, the more we do this opening in this way, the more the higher risk I think it's going to be of like dropping an actual spoiler. So we'll have to pay attention. Just keep an eye on that. So if it hasn't become apparent already, we've assembled this highly trained team today, to break down the newest Mission Impossible film, Dead Reckoning Part 1. So if this is your first time listening to us, we'll have a brief section at the beginning designed for folks who haven't seen the film yet. And then we will very clearly sound the alarm when we're about to get into spoilers for the rest of the episode. But first, since we haven't done a proper movie news check-in in a little while, but there was huge news since we last recorded, and that is that Hollywood is basically, or the actors specifically, shutting Hollywood down. SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Guild, has officially gone on strike. I've been following the coverage. You know, it's been fiery, and actually like seems to already have gained a lot more attention than when the writers went on strike, which I have mixed feelings about. On the one hand, I'm happy because that probably means that like, you know, we're going to make some progress potentially because the actors are kind of making a bigger dent and making life harder for the studios. But on the other hand, I'm like, oh, but like no one cares about writers. So has anyone else been following this news or want to jump in with what's going on?
Yeah, I followed all the news too, and it's like, wow, Fran Drescher is awesome. Like, who knew? Like, I haven't thought about Fran Drescher in 20 years, and that's no disrespect because she's killing it, and I had no idea she was president of the union right now, right? And that she would be such a leader in that. My silly bit of news in this is I actively saw the results of the strike quite by accident, which is I was driving through a part of my hometown. I don't know why I need to be like mysterious. I live in Melrose, Massachusetts, and there was a full street decked out for Halloween. And I was like, what is going on? And like good suburbanites, we checked Facebook, and a lot of nosy neighbors pointed out it was Beetlejuice 2 was in town to shoot scenes for what would have been some kind of Halloween setting. And lo and behold, somebody posted on Facebook, get over there now if you want to see it because it's coming down. And so this whole street had been lined out to make it look like a New England fall and make it look like Halloween. And then the next morning, they stripped it all down. I think maybe people aren't from areas where filming happens regularly, but you see the little signs that point the way to what actors call base camp, right? And where the crew and the actors are going to park. That was all set up with trailers over at the high school that my son and I saw. And then it was like, poof, it's all gone. And, you know, look, it was kind of a funny thing to stumble upon, but it reminded me like, this is a huge deal. And all these productions are spending a lot of money and were ready to film the next morning and then just had to tear it all down, presumably throw it in a box and save it for 6 months from now or whatever. But it was a good reminder to me that this isn't just like some people not driving to a studio in Hollywood on a given day, that this is a massive undertaking that, I think is warranted because the studios have to be doing better than they're doing.
Yeah. And I think that they're fully justified in trying to get a better deal. It's obviously positioning for the different negotiating sides, but the stories that have been coming out about what some of the proposals were from the producers. The sort of big one that was getting the most attention was that they wanted all sort of background actors, so like extras, to show up for a day, get scanned, and then their likeness could be used in perpetuity across any production that the producers were working on. So someone would get paid for a day, and then their image would be used forever. Now, again, that's information that came from the other side. So that sounds really bad. Is that exactly what the proposal was? I don't know. But yeah, it's good for them. Appreciate the solidarity between the actors and the writers. There's here in LA, there's picket lines. You can go to a picket line pretty easily if you want to, outside of the various studio buildings. And even though this was the week it ratcheted up to low to mid 90s, they were out there all day making it happen, and that's really good. And if you didn't see it, there was a anonymously sourced unnamed producer, which is what anonymous means, but unnamed producer who was quoted in a news article as saying we're just gonna wait them out until the writers lose all their houses, and then they'll come crawling back. And then Ron Perlman went on Twitter and said he was going to find their house and come get them, which I think he had to walk back because it was a direct threat to someone's bodily harm. But it was awesome because it was Ron Perlman, and I believed him.
Oh, that's amazing. I feel like he does usually play a type. And so it's happy to know that that's at least partly, it sounds like inspired by his actual persona in real life. That's great. I would be very afraid of Ron Perlman. That's were I a studio executive.
I'll just point out the other silly thing I saw basically as I joined Threads was the fact that Disney held a red carpet, or maybe it was a purple carpet, for Haunted Mansion, and they just had the characters walk it because none of the actors.
I saw that too.
So it was Mickey and Minnie and Maleficent walking a red carpet. It's like, yeah, it's not gonna work.
Yeah. And we had I think the first version of this was the cast of Oppenheimer mid-premiere.
Wow.
Right? Like they showed up at the premiere and stayed for 20 minutes, and then the clock struck starting the strike, and they were like, we're out of here.
And that story gave me a little window into how certain people can feel about it, I guess, because I did see comments online where they were like, this was so disrespectful to the fans. the fans of Oppenheimer who were excited about this, that the actors just got up and left. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess that's your sympathies. This is the people who are mad at players on sports in various professional sports if they ever go on strike or get locked out because they make millions of dollars, and it's right, but the people who make billions off of them are not sharing as much as they should. So it's it's not as universally popular, I guess, as one may think.
But what about the Haunted Mansion fans? Who's asking questions about them? Well, there are dozens of them.
I didn't go back to that message board after Haunted Mansion, so
I'm not even sure fans of Haunted Mansion, the ride at Disneyland, are actually excited about this movie because it doesn't even. I don't know.
I'm scared to know how many people would rather just see the hitchhiking ghost, as a performed by a cast member at Disneyland, as opposed to Lakeith Stanfield. So it's, we probably don't want it to break those numbers down.
Right. This is not a Haunted Mansion trailer reaction podcast, though, so I think we're gonna move on.
We can do a mini episode. It looks bad.
Yes. Anyway, I was like, I could say more, but I'm not going to, because then then we really will be sidetracked. But yeah, so my big question is, obviously, this is big news, but it's also important news, and we support the writers and the actors, and this is a really historical moment, I think, because this was what Fran Drescher really nicely said in her press conference speech, is that this is a precedent-setting strike, where it's all the stuff with AI and kind of rights and who gets to use whose images for what things and who gets paid for their images and likeness and stuff, it really is a pivotal moment that will set the tone for other industries. And so I think, the gravity and the ripple effect probably of what's starting to happen right now, we have yet to foresee. But like in terms of movies specifically, and I'm thinking award season, what do we think what does the rest of the year look like now that there are no actors doing anything or promoting anything or showing up anywhere?
I mean, it'll be wild if they're still striking by like the Oscars or even the precursors for the Oscars. I feel like the long projection, or the sort of the people who are leaning to the side of this will be longer than you think are saying through the end of the year. So if it carries over into early 24 and into those months, that'll be tough. But yeah, it's people can't campaign. They're not going to be able to be out sort of hyping themselves up. Where would Everything Everywhere All at Once be if the cast couldn't have been to a bunch of screenings and events last year? So yeah, it might change it. And it also, we were I guess pre-recording in talking about this Beetlejuice 2 news about like, are things going to get other things going to get moved that are done? Are there going to be movies that they have and they're completed? Are they going to hold them back because they know there's going to be a however many month gap sometime in 18, 24 months out? So other movies that we think, this is a lock to be in the conversation, that might not come out this year because the studios will want to hold it to have content to fill this gap.
And it was interesting to see, Andor had a really big showing at the Emmy nominations, which made me ecstatic. But then it was that kind of feeling like, are they going to get, I don't want to say like an asterisk Emmy, but if there's no ceremony and it's released by tweet, like those Golden Globes were a couple years ago, it's like, that is going to feel like a lesser win. And that's unfortunate because, it's nobody's intention to have that. But, the other funny piece of this, and this speaks a little bit to PT's fandom message board that he was referencing, is like Comic-Con is this weekend in San Diego. You guys aren't going, I assume. I know, have in the past, but it's like, who's there? It's scary. It might actually be a comic book convention this year.
Oh no.
Like because all the big panels seem to have pulled out, or they're just going to be showing footage or trying to give some giveaways, I assume, to try to make people excited about these things still. I had said in a different group chat, we're about to start Ahsoka season for Star Wars, and it's like, we're not going to see the promotion machine behind that and see Rosario Dawson out giving interviews. I have tickets in town to Boston Fan Expo, and I had an email that explained that yes, the guests are still allowed to come to this because the union rules are active promotion is not allowed. But like, I have an autographed ticket for Hayden Christensen, love him, not actively promoting a project. So I think that those types of things are going to become an important source of revenue for some stars, right? Like a certain level star is going to need to do more of those types of appearances. So that all kind of evens out in the fan circuit a little bit, but it's going to be really different for a while. I think PT's right to point out that the fan bros are going to fan bro and say, you're hurting us, not the studios. But I think there's, going to be backlash against all of this once those kind of very vocal parts of fandom take off.
Right. The scariest part to me was that Ann Thompson on IndieWire, the IndieWire's podcast, Screen Talk, she was saying that, like, based on all the press that's coming out, and in particular the press conference, she said that the biggest phrase that she took away was Fran Drescher saying that the studios were really tone deaf. And that was the biggest problem, is that they don't even seem to understand where this conversation should start. Like, they don't even see what the problem is. And with the idea that, like, they would have the digital likeness to a background actor in perpetuity and just be able to do whatever they want. Right. So I think this is PT, were you going to jump in with something?
Yeah, I was going to say the more sophisticated pushback I've seen on but for both the writers and the actors for striking right now has been people saying like, is the potential issue that there has been so much content generated in the last like decade, and everyone always talks about how like, oh man, there's just so many shows and I never have a chance to catch up on them, that it's going to be a problem for the industry that like they're not releasing new things that are generating a lot of money, but to what degree will it affect a lot of like viewers and a lot of fans when it's sort of like, oh, I can go and watch all those Netflix shows that I never had a chance to, or there's a bunch of HBO or FX shows that I've heard about but I've just never done the Americans. Now's the time because I'm not getting new episodes of whatever. House of the Dragon's not going to come, so I'm going to go watch Wheel of Time, go listen and then listen to Greg's podcast. And so, whatever that like, is there the possibility of, and again, I feel like this is more sort of producer studio industry side thinking of like, are we shooting ourselves in the foot with this because the audience isn't going to care that there's not enough new stuff because there's so much stuff that's new to them, like NBC Thursday nights in the 90s, and that's going to be that could be an interesting factor, but so that feels the least tone deaf of the potential arguments, but it does seem like this sort of crying poor of like, the things are changing, we can't pay anyone, we got to use these like other things, feels very disingenuous for these huge companies with giant executive pay, the sort of thing we don't know anything about in higher education.
Yeah. I'll just toss in there, just by way to note, if people haven't seen it, the union is being very clear that they are not asking people who support them to stop watching. They're like, no, keep watching, drive up the numbers on all these things. I think whatever minuscule royalties they get, they want right now. And then also it just puts the demand on these services to, maybe not Netflix, but the rest of them, there is a bottom, right? You can get to like the end of the things you would watch, and that should put, pressure on them to get new stuff back out there. And we'll see, but that's the ask from the union. Feed the algorithm, and the algorithm will demand more content. There's a segue, Jen.
Yep. I was like, I saw that coming. So there is a very natural segue actually from this news to Dead Reckoning Part 1, because this is not a spoiler, the main villain is an AI algorithm called the Entity. And so, I feel like, and we're going to get into it a lot more later, I assume, in terms of what the significant, like, what is this movie trying to say about AI? But it's very clearly trying to say something, or it's like very clearly trying to tap into current anxieties about AI. And so the thing I was actually kind of mulling over that I want to hear your thoughts on, that will then get us to segue into our short takes on the film itself. But like, Tom Cruise is out here trying to save movie theaters, right? Like, and before the Dead Reckoning, there's like a little hello from him and Chris McQuarrie clip being like, maybe this was only in where I saw this. Greg, did you not have this?
I didn't see it either.
I had this.
Oh, okay.
So okay, now I feel like I can just like explain it to Greg and then therefore explain it to listeners. So before the movie started, it was like after the previews, but before the movie started, there was, and it looks like they're wearing clothes that I've seen them wear in other interviews. So there must have just been like a press junket day where they just filmed this, but it's Tom Cruise and Chris McQuarrie sitting next to each other and basically being like, thank you for coming to a movie theater to see this. And so it's very clear that this movie is part of a Tom Cruise's crusade to try to like save movie theaters, right? And so then I started thinking about, okay, but how does this issue of like the use of AI and digital technology, like, is that aligned with what's being asked for in the strike, or is it against it, right? Like, so, and I really didn't have a good answer for that. And I was like, it seems like those conversations seem to be happening separately right now, and I'm not sure they should. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I like how you said it. I mean, I was also just thinking, like, maybe I didn't get it because I went to AMC and mainly had Nicole welcoming me. And it was really
Oh,
jarring last year at Top Gun when Nicole welcomed you and then Tom Cruise welcomed you.
awkward.
It's
But
magic in a place like this. It's
I think it is funny that the drivers behind Let's Save movie theaters are people like Tom Cruise or Spielberg or these I mean, he was just actively working to save TCM first, but like, there's this active spirit of like, we need theaters for this kind of communal experience and they're so important. And the labor that they did to then really just support the studios, because I think the studios need the theatrical more than the actors do, but that's a complicated web of relationships to try to evaluate. So it is funny to me that then it's like, what else does Dead Reckoning prove? But like, you need Tom Cruise, right? You can't fill in, I don't know, let's pick a generic action star, Jeremy Renner, for example, into the center of a Mission Impossible movie, and everybody will still go, right? So you can't put an AI or a, computer generated version of this. Like, Dead Reckoning and films like it are good because of the real true hands that mold it and act in it and edit it and on and write it, of course, and on and on and on. And so it's like, it's kind of cutting against AI, which I do think the movie more aligns with that version of it than the like, let's get out to the movies type of thing.
And I will say the sort of tangled web of things that I also don't understand that Greg mentioned. I think the headlines have all been about AI on the strikes, but there's also stuff about like streaming residuals and how do we like track streaming views where it's not the same as box office or Nielsen ratings for broadcast and cable TV. So that is an element, and I think that one of the shifts that it seems like it's been happening recently has been Netflix was huge and seemed so successful. So all these studios were like, well, we're going to do our own version of this. So now there's Disney and there's Peacock and there's Paramount. And it feels like the sort of business side of all those places are like, this doesn't actually make us any money. And there's a little bit of like the Uber history at Netflix of like, are you making any money, or are you just taking a lot of money from people who think you're making money and you're just sort of getting like venture capitalists to and investors to cover up the fact that like this is never profitable. So this sort of old tried and true model of theatrical distribution where it's just like, okay, we know what we're getting and we know that we're doing this. There was between the shift to the studios being like, yeah, we'll put stuff on our streaming platform and that's going to make us a bunch of money. And then obviously the pandemic, which was out of their hands, I think. No, it was. I'm just kidding. But that, that they were making the shift and now they're like, no, wait, reverse course. And they want to turn back to the theater. And it feels like, that's an interesting sort of background to, Tom Cruise is the public face of everyone go back to the movies. And there's the sort of more sort of idealistic view of that as it's like, well, we come together, we're different people, we all have different thoughts and backgrounds, but we're here having this shared experience. The Roger Ebert movies are an empathy machine concept, and all of that. And in a communal place, that's good. But there's also Tom Cruise, the businessman producer type, who is just sort of like, this is the best way to make a lot of money. If we release Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 straight to Paramount Plus, all of us will make way less money than if it's a success in the theaters first. So yeah, I think that that kind of business side to it is also kind of behind the headlines of how are actors and writers going to get paid, how is distribution going to happen, and how is this industry going to be profitable and successful enough to carry forward.
Well said, both of you. The only thing I'll add to that is, and then we should move on to our short takes, is that I think this issue seems largely, or the future of movies seems framed as a binary of like the new way and the old way, the streaming and theatrical, as kind of like just a binary opposition. And I feel like that's actually part of the problem, is that the industry needs to evolve to account for both, right? It's not just an either or. And that, yes, like the pay structure, and this is largely what Fran Drescher was talking about, like they contracts need to be updated to reflect the current business models of the streaming age. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that needs to happen. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that like movie theaters shut down. And then on the other hand too, like Tom Cruise is out here being like, we did all practical stunt work, right? The behind the scenes things for one of the, which I don't want to spoil it, I guess, but one of the tricks that he performs is in like, there's a behind the scenes thing that where he's like insistent that they use no visual effects to like compensate for his lack of being able to do this thing. And he's like really bragging about not using any digital effects. But I feel like at the same time, we've seen the trend that most people who go to the movies still are doing it for big budget, huge, dazzling visual effects type movies. And so to me, it's just super interesting how there's all these push and pulls everywhere for all these different approaches to movie making. But there has to be a way that they can all coexist where everyone gets compensated fairly and everyone, can make choices for what they want to do and how they want to consume entertainment and all that.
I mean, I think you're right about spectacle. But if superhero movies are really cooling to the degree they seem to be, then the only thing left is brands based around actors and directors, right? Like people will go see Quentin Tarantino's 10th movie. People will go see, the new Alexander Payne. So I hope that strengthens the bargaining positioning of Tom Cruise, the actor, versus Tom Cruise, the producer.
Right.
Because I think it is true that, like if we are in this moment where it seems like the message this summer is blockbusters are doing okay, but not great. And some of that narrative is a little complex, but it's like, yeah, if the spectacle is not driving it, then you have to package it around this. The counterexample might be Barbie, which just is like pay people to market your movie insanely well, and you'll get results as well. So, these are all points on team humanity versus team AI. Oh, great. Now the robots are going to take me off because this is on the public record.
Oh, Greg, we're losing you. Oh, no.
What? Well, yeah, Greg, you forgot about brands based on brands. That's the other thing. It's not blockbusters. It's just the Barbie movie.
I was going to mention Air because I feel like the historical shift of Michael Jordan being paid for his brand is actually not irrelevant here, right?
No,
like that's the same thing that's just happening just with AI likeness and digital likeness. For him, it was more just like he is the shoe, right?
Well, and I'm going to pick on PT because in the Zoom or Zencaster, there's a beautiful shot of his high-end toys behind him. And I think about how all those actors have to give their 3D scans over to Lucasfilm or Marvel or whatever. And that's part of the contract. If I were an actor, I'd be super nervous about where that scan was and how many people were in possession of it. Because if things are going to get that underhanded, and like it's ready to go, here it is. We already have Chris Evans in a box for you on a thumb drive. Here's Chris Evans to go. So I don't know. It's interesting to think about. You said it right. It's the update to the contract. The contract hasn't moved as the business took giant leaps in different directions. It's time to update it all.
Yeah. And one last thing that I'll say about all this, and this is probably like a whole other separate podcast conversation, but I think that one of the issues of the sort of trying to steer the ship back to the theatrical experience is, the infrastructure, for lack of a better word, of the theatrical experience for in many places is not particularly strong. The theaters were not getting as many customers. They're not getting a lot of funding, and so the screens are not in great shape. The projectors are not particularly good. The way in which it gets things get parsed out, where The blockbuster is going to get 14 screens on a 16 screen multiplex. Makes it hard for people to, even if they want to go and see movies in a lot of places. Like we're both, everyone on this call is in like a privileged position of being in Los Angeles or Boston, places that do have smaller theaters that do smaller things. But I think that reflective of a lot of things in the country around the concept of infrastructure. It's just sort of like, well, we ignored it for a long time and we took it for granted, or we actively were trying to push it away because we were like, we're going to move on to new and better things, and our advances are going to make this obsolete. And now that it's like, oh, actually, no, we do need that. We need movie theaters and we need bridges. It's like, well, now we don't have people don't trust it anymore, and people are not certain that this is worth saving. And that's the real sort of uphill battle, and that's why you've got Tom Cruise like begging people to be happy they went to the movie theater when they're already in the movie theater to see the movie. But it's to try to generate this like, no, this is good, this is worth it. But when it costs $30 or $40 a person, not counting babysitting, not counting other things between tickets and concessions and maybe parking, if you have to pay for that, or transportation, it's tough. It can be a tough sell, especially if you end up spending the movie with someone next to you, like on their phone, just like whatever, dilly-dallying instead of paying attention. So yeah, I think that it's something we all really love, the theatrical experience. And so that's something that is, how exactly are we going to save that? And that's separate from the strike. That's more of a conceptual thing, to bring it back to what's important. The people who make this happen, the human beings that create the art that we want to go and see and enjoy, need to be correctly compensated.
All right, we're ready to move on to our short takes of our general impressions of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Greg, since you missed our retrospective episode, you get to go first. So if it's, I think off mic I joked that this was your opportunity to deliver your manifesto, so about the Mission Impossible franchise. So if there's anything kind of more broadly that you want to start us off with Mission Impossible in general, before kind of giving your short take on Dead Reckoning specifically, feel free.
There could be no peace without a great suffering. The greater the suffering, etc.
One time in high school, it was our senior year, and the band director told the jazz band, when it gets to the drum solo, I'm just going to let him go. It's his last concert before graduation. He can just go as long as he wants, and he will cue the rest of us back in. I feel that's like what you just handed me. It's like you're going to sit back and hear me do impressions of every great drum solo in history. I unabashedly love this franchise. And it was really funny because after Fallout came out, I actually think I'd missed Rogue Nation in the theater. I caught it on POV or something. PPV. POV is point of view.
VOD.
VOD, there it is, some venereal disease. So I'd missed that one, and then I went and saw Fallout, and I remember being like, yeah, I like this franchise. I haven't seen one in a while. And then I was like halfway through Fallout in a giant IMAX screen, and I'm like, this is the greatest thing that man has ever created. It blew me away and is absolutely a 5-star movie to me. I think Fallout is flawless. PT has alluded to Empire spoiler specials before, and I think they did 8 hours of podcast about Fallout, and I listened to every single minute of that, and 5 other podcasts about it. I became truly obsessed. And somewhere around that time, I have a really good Star Wars buddy named Carl. And Carl was like, hey, can you tell me like why you like this so much? Because he looked at my kind of like profile of things I love, and it didn't fit the thing. And it was a good question for me because I'm like, I actually don't know what it is that I love about it. Hey, Tom Cruise is problematic. Totally get it. Yes, he supports a terrible institution. But I think as one of the hosts of Pod Save America said at Fallout, if there was a van outside that just said Scientology, do what you just saw Tom Cruise do, I would get in that van and I would just go and I would sign on and be a part of it. So I went into this movie with sky high expectations. In January, I listed my top 10 most anticipated. This was number 1 on the list. And I will say I left my first screening just a little bit let down. I don't think this is Fallout. I think this is good, not great. And now I've seen it a second time since, and it definitely improved on the second viewing. I think some of the plot becomes a little more clear. You can kind of understand where things are going. And there's just that familiarity with where, what you're about to see. So do I recommend this? Absolutely. This is a way better time at the movies. Big Picture pointed out, put this next to Fast 10 and just realize like the craftsmanship that went into making this a really, really good movie. And that's right. We don't get things like this at this scale, and it's totally worth seeing and totally worth seeing on the big screen. But it just won't hit the top of my Mission Impossible franchise ranking.
Yeah, I'm in a similar place. I wouldn't say let down necessarily, but to me, this is underneath the trilogy of the 4, 5, and 6. That sort of again, I kind of lump Ghost Protocol in as a part of the Christopher McQuarrie era, because I know he was an uncredited like heavy hand at assembling the final script. So I feel like it's a little bit under those, but like it's higher on my list of movies I've enjoyed this year than it is on my list of Mission Impossible movies. So which I think speaks to the quality of these this franchise and just how much fun this is at the theater. I had a great time, and we can pull apart and nitpick a whole bunch of different elements and discuss why maybe we thought, or at least why Greg and I, we'll see what Jen thinks, didn't think it was quite up there in the franchise, but like I've only seen it the one time. I'm excited to watch this movie over and over again, throughout the rest of my life. And I, was just like giddily enjoying myself in the way that I do when I see these movies that are just really good at tapping into that kind of movie going glee at seeing things unfold on a big screen. So yeah, I choose to accept. Is my short take.
I'm fairly similar. I think the action set pieces in this do not disappoint at all, and they're some of the action sequences I think are up there. They're in the running. They're not quite Burj Khalifa, right? But they're in the same tier, I would say. And so, like for me, like the action, the Tom Cruise factor. I loved Haley Atwell. She was incredible in this. Yes, she's so good. I'm just like, let's make her the next James Bond. Like, let's do it yesterday. What are we doing here? I think she's so good, and I loved her so much. But I'd say that, in our retrospective episode, I sort of had said that when this franchise is at its best, it has, a somewhat uncomplicated but very compelling story that all hangs together and has character beats that all hang together in addition to the action spectacle. And that's what kind of makes it really special and elevates it above a lot of other action movie franchises. This I felt like that's where it was sort of stumbling a little bit, that like the plot and some of the character arcs, like some of that was not quite firing on all cylinders for me. I have some notes specifically about certain returning characters, which we'll definitely get into in spoiler section. And I actually feel like what's really interesting is that, and this might segue us into the recommendation algorithm, that I feel like this felt closer to Mission Impossible 1 than any of the Chris McQuarrie movies have. To the point where I was like, are we just kind of like going, like, was this a purposeful return to the beginning? And is that part of the story? Is that like we're revisiting the origins of this character, or just this, or is it just that Chris McQuarrie wanted to like make an homage to Brian De Palma or something like that? Because I feel like there's, from the style that it's shot, which we're gonna get into, I'm sure, to the type of plot that it is and how much more convoluted the plot potentially is, all that stuff reminded me so much of Mission Impossible 1, and like not necessarily in a good way. Or if I point to the things that I think aren't working as well, it's the things that are trying to be like Mission Impossible 1, if that makes sense.
It does. I think that the sort of McQuarrie approach, which again, if you can get into the Empire podcast archives, you can see Greg. I have heard reports there's a 12-hour version coming out for this movie.
I just subscribed again because I have to hear
that. So I don't know if he's going to ask it to be held back because of the WGA. Who knows? But it's already been recorded, so it could get out there. But the McQuarrie approach, which is they sort of figure out set pieces they want to do. Then they figure out what the end point's going to be, and then they reverse engineer a story from there. Which it is sort of this magic trick that they've been able to pull off multiple times so far. They take some really big swings in this, and I think that part of it is that like they're trying to like they're adding more plates to spin in many different ways, and they're not able to keep all of them up, or at least all of them spinning as successfully as in the earlier ones. I also wonder if we're going to feel differently whenever part 2 comes out. The thing that we didn't talk, we transition around the AI from the strike into this. The other transition is now we have no idea when part 2 is coming out. It was supposed to come out next year, but the filming was also supposed to start now, like for whatever they need to add to it. So, it could be a while until part 2 happens. But I don't think this was written to be 2 movies. I think that the end point they started with is whatever the end point of part 2 was, and then they worked their way back. So maybe some of the things that feel clunky, that feel convoluted now, are going to be, seem a lot better and seem more like it's just laying groundwork. If you watch just the first half of Rogue Nation or Fallout, it might feel very similar of just like, what the hell's happening? And like, why is this going this way? So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how it all looks in retrospect.
Very good point. In spoilers, I have a couple guesses at pieces that were dropped in that seem like they're for part 2. And it'd be fun to compare notes on that. For recommendation algorithm, I want to throw in, if you left Guardians 3 and was like, hey, Pom Klementif stole that movie, see this, because she is also awesome in this, completely different than Mantis, but just, one of my frustrations with the Guardians movies is you never get to see the women's actual faces. It's like a weird thing James Gunn has. It's like, let's make all the women weird and the dudes normal. She's here as, a character, obviously, but you see her without the makeup and antenna, and it's like, oh, she's really good and clearly got really into the stunts and the training as well. So, absolutely co-signed the Haley Atwell, but I kind of already knew Haley Atwell was awesome. This was a big jump up in stock on Pom Klementif, and give her I don't think a spinoff would work, but like I don't know, her own Alias type show or something, and I'd be all in.
I think she needs to be in a Quentin Tarantino movie, because I think in the Letterboxd, what are your 4 favorite movies? She listed Kill Bill. She said Kill Bill, Old Boy. I'm not going to remember but I was just...
It was Gone Girl, which is her feel-good movie.
That's right.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
And, I do forget the 4th one.
But they all had good answers, and like their answers, I think, were very reflective of their own kind of personalities and personas. But I feel like Pom Klementif was the one where I was like, yes, like let's get her in more movies like this. Like she knows what's up. It's and it's very clear that all that her taste was informing her performance in this movie, and in a way that was really fun. I would also, to counter the Haley Atwell point, I feel like, yes, we knew how awesome she was, or maybe you didn't if you didn't watch the Agent Carter TV series, I guess, and you only know her from Marvel. But
you're speaking to Bob Iger right now, who just said Marvel just started TV, so he didn't even watch Agent Carter.
That's some Haley Atwell erasure, Peggy Carter erasure. I do not approve of this. But I feel like she hasn't had an opportunity like this yet. Like this was probably a big swing for her in terms of like, it's basically a female lead in a huge action franchise. And like I've heard a lot of critics say that she's co-starring in this with Tom Cruise. Like, it's not even like she's like one of the supporting characters. It's like her story in a lot of ways, if you look at it from a certain angle. So So I think she just like knocked it out of the park. It's great. So hopefully this opens lots of other doors for her. Anyway, but recommendation algorithm, you got me distracted by Haley. Can people, if for some reason they're listening to this and they've never seen a Mission Impossible movie, I don't know who that would be, I guess. So maybe this is a terrible question, but like, can someone jump into the franchise by going to the movies and seeing this? Would you recommend that?
I'm going to say yes, which I feel like is maybe not a popular answer for this. But I think yes, only because the plots are so convoluted and crazy anyway, that it's just like, oh, you just have to buy along of just like, oh, they've worked with this character before. And throughout the whole franchise, there's always times where it's just like, I got to go talk to somebody. And you have the further along you get, you're like, oh, is this going to be a character from another movie? And it's like, nope, it's just some other person that, that Ethan Hunt worked with. So, it doesn't, I don't think it necessarily would matter that you don't know the history of him with all these people. I think there's enough sort of information scaffolded in to let you kind of know the dynamics between all of them. But I don't know why you would have not wanted to see them before, and now you're like, well, this is the time. And that I guess that's where maybe, to your point of who is 46 minutes into a podcast about it that still hasn't really gotten to talking about the movie, that like is then like, well, I don't know, am I going to want to see this movie? But I think that you could. And you would have a good time because so much of it is the action and the spectacle and the sort of, the dramatic stakes are sort of very in the moment, and the backstory is great, and it's more fun when you know the other things, but I don't think it's necessary.
I co-sign that. Sure, dive into 7. Will you have a fun time at the movies? Absolutely. I actually also on my flight recently, I ended up watching John Wick on somebody's TV, like a little ahead of me, and it totally works silent on an airport plane screen. I would co-sign that for this. Like, this totally works as like a silent movie. Like, if somehow you want to watch it that way, as the creators intended, silently on a tiny screen. But if somebody were to say, Greg, where should I jump in? I think PT gave you this advice to start at 3. 3 is where things get good in this franchise. That's no disrespect to number 1, which has some really good stuff in it. But if somebody was like, I'm not really sure, I might now at this point tell them start at 5 and do 5, 6, 7, because they are building on each other in ways that are inessential, as PT just said, but give you a nice bit of resonance between them if you do know, oh, this guy is Solomon Lane, he's from the last movie, or this is the White Widow who showed up last movie, or maybe you know her from The Crown or Hobbs and Shaw, whatever. But I think you can do it. My screening, I think there were some kids who were along with their dad, like, sure, let's just see this movie, and seem to have a fine time.
I like that tiered approach of like, you can jump in cold if you want to watch something, but you don't want to watch everything. 5, 6, I think that's a really good call. And then if you want to go back even further, start at 3. I think having that sort of tiered opt-in approach makes sense.
I like the 5, 6, 7 because then if what they do is what Jen did, which is 5, 6, 7, and then swing back to the beginning, that means that you end with Ghost Protocol, which is pretty strong, as opposed to if you start with 3, which means you end with Mission Impossible 2, a movie I don't believe Jen ever actually finished.
I came close. I came close enough. I was like,
I get it. She's like, I get it.
I was like, I know where this is going. Like, I don't need to... I mean, it was also just I ran out of time. But you're right. I didn't go back and finish like the last 25 minutes that I didn't have time to watch before we recorded the other episode. But yeah. All right. I think we're ready to go into spoiler mode. So if you have not seen any of the Mission Impossible movies, and especially if you haven't seen Dead Reckoning Part 1, which is out in theaters now, this is there's only one parachute for you. You gotta take it now. So I'm gonna count down from 3, and then after that, you are on your own. So 3, 2, 1. We're in spoiler mode. So
go spoiler mode. What's the thing that they say when they're on the phone? It's like
go secure.
Go secure.
Oh, secure. That's right.
Go secure. Go spoiler.
Go spoiler. Nice. So where I'll leave it up to you two. Where do you want to start? There's a lot that we can dig into. I have a lot of questions.
I got to start with my Letterboxd review.
Go for
This
it.
movie did Ilsa wrong. Ilsa deserved better, right? So that's, when I say this isn't as good, I thought both 5 and 6, I'm going to get my numbers confused, created this incredible character of Ilsa Faust, and they let her be not defined ever by being a lust object like a Bond girl would be, right? I mean, that's not to say she's not gorgeous in the yellow gown. We all see it. We know what we're dealing with, but she's always capable and independent. There was a lot of talk in those Empire spoiler specials about Fallout, how she was really worried about the end where Ethan's wife shows back up and suddenly, like, what's that dynamic? And she and McQuarrie worked on it a lot. And then in this movie, it's like, hey, I got to go film Dune. Write me out of it, I feel like. And Jen, she was the actress I told you you'd be excited about because she's from Dune. There she is, Rebecca Ferguson, who was phenomenal in the last 2 and does great with limited material here. But I was really disappointed that she went out and how she went out. And I'll let PT explain his meme response.
I almost posted it to the Instagram account. But yeah, it's the meme, everybody, is the one where it's the like, I'm no longer friends with, I forget the names. It's like Salman and some like Rashid or something like that. But yeah, that like basically it's like I'm no longer friends with Rebecca Ferguson. Like Haley Atwell is my new best friend. Because the to me, the worse than Ilsa Faust dying, which I did not like, and I did not care for that, was that it was like, people were sad. Like in the movie, the characters were like, that's a bummer. And then it was like, well, we have another girl and we're just going to slot her right into the team and that's going to be fine. So like now you just have to make the choice and you're now Ilsa and that's fine. And you'll serve the exact same purpose that Ilsa did. And, it's great because it's Haley Atwell and like she was so awesome in the movie, but it was sort of like, there's it doesn't have maybe as much resonance as it should, to the degree, and this is pure copium where I'm just like, I don't know if she's dead. I don't know if Ilsa's actually dead. We saw her on the ground, but we saw her on the ground before. And you know what it turned out? It turned out she wasn't dead. They did a fake out. Why would you do a death fake out in the beginning of the movie to only then kill her in the not even at the middle of the movie? If it isn't going to be in part 2, that it was like actually when the boat showed up, because like right after he finds her, the boat comes up. It was actually that she was still alive, and they carted her off somewhere, and she's going to come back. Now that Dune Part 2 is done, she'll be able to come back for Dead Reckoning Part 2. Ilsa lives.
Don't give my hopes up like that, PT. Like, because I was partly like, they could, if people are as upset about this as I think they are, not just the 3 of us, but I've heard other people be upset about this. They could retcon it where they're like, they flash back to her on the ground and then like she pulled the mask off or something, like, you know what I mean? Like they could retcon a mask moment where it's not actually her or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they will. I think this is the end of the line for our girl, and I feel like they did her real dirty, and I'm just very upset. And the thing is, like, I knew way early that this was going to happen. The second she holds hands with Ethan on the gondola or whatever, and they seem happy together, I'm just like, no, they're not going to do that. This is not okay. I was like, and so I was like stewing about it until it actually happened, which I feel like was a good like half hour later, right? Because you go through the whole nightclub scene, like there's a lot that happens in between, and so then I knew that the beginning was a fake out, and I actually thought that the part in the desert I thought was worked pretty well. Because it was like showed how he's still so attached to her, and then they have this strong bond, and like that. I thought it was really nice because it's like in the past movies, she's always the one who's choosing to save him against her own agenda, and this was sort of like the same thing, just like he's returning the favor. And then they just went ahead and had her go out in a lame sword fight in the background of a scene. You know what I mean? Like it was like really anticlimactic. and it had nothing to I guess my biggest problem with it is that it has nothing. I feel like if Ilsa were to die, it would have to be after some climactic moment with Ethan, right? It would have to be some massive sacrifice. I wanted, like, that's sort of what I was missing, is that because Ethan's not even there when she dies, right? And it's just kind of this like very weak repartee that she has with the Gabriel character, and it just, I don't know. And then, but then also, yeah, I'm getting so mad about this now. On top of all that, right? That's like, all that's bad. But on top of all that, they position her as one of many women that Ethan has to choose, right? And that's what I really didn't like about the nightclub scene, is that it positions, we got Ilsa in one corner, we've got Grace in another corner, and we have Alana, right, the White Widow, in another corner, and right, it's like, oh, look at all of these women who want to be with Ethan. And it became to me actually like a very regressive James Bond thing, where it was like, oh, and like they're all under threat and you can't save them all, and isn't that sad? But then you'll move on with your life, right? Like it had big James Bond energy to it, in the like women are disposable kind of way, which I did not like. And I feel like the franchise had done so well up until that point with the Ilsa Faust character, not plugging her, as Greg just said, not plugging her into that kind of narrative. And then we put it right back in it. So yeah, when I said I had notes, it was mostly about this.
But now when we get to part 2 and it turns out that she's alive, it's going to be,
am I going to be not mad?
Jen.
I'm still going to be mad.
I mean, I would scream in the theater if that theory is correct. I would because then
it becomes that's what you thought it was, but actually that's how Ethan Hunt is undermining the entity, is because he doesn't just think of women as disposable, interchangeable objects. It's not. I mean, I'm really digging myself in a corner, because now this won't happen, and I may actively dislike. But I do think I want to be clear. I really enjoyed this movie. I think we're focusing on the parts we didn't like, and I have a few more other elements that I want to complain about. But I did overall really like it. I think that now it's getting to the point where if part 2 doesn't bring her back, I'm going to be like, I may actively just not like this now. I may be just like negative about it. The only pushback I have on what you said, Jen, is that sword fight looked awesome. It was short. It was too short. But like when they squared off, like, and he's got a dagger and she's got a sword on the bridge, like that one sort of like kind of long shot of it looked really cool. And I was like, this is great. And they're not going to kill her.
Going back and forth over the top was really rad.
And they're not going to kill her, because that would be a really dumb thing to do right now. So like she's going to survive somehow. So maybe, like, I don't know, on the second viewing, if it will be more dread than cool, but it did look cool. I also remember thinking, I wasn't as tuned in, because again, I was too confident that they wouldn't do her this dirty and just like put her right in a fridge. But I do remember thinking during that nightclub scene, I was like, I don't think it's legal to have Rebecca Ferguson, Vanessa Kirby, and Haley Atwell together in one scene. This is just too much. This is too powerful. They can't do this. And the movie was like, we agree. We're going to get rid of one. And I was like, oh no, like we gotta, so, vote in your local elections. We got to change that law, because apparently it should be legal to let all 3 of them live.
I did really like, to focus on more positive things. I did in that scene really like the editing, like the quick cuts to people's reactions, and there's a lot of glances, and there's a lot of implied history, and that they're kind of speaking to each other without speaking. I couldn't quite follow what they were all saying to each other with their eyes 100% of the time necessarily, but I liked that it was doing that. I just didn't like what was actually happening in the scene. I guess my thing with the sword fight is that I just, by the end of this movie, I really didn't care. Like, I like the actor who's playing Gabriel a lot, but I didn't really care about him as a character at all.
He's tricky.
I don't know if there's a way to get around that, right? Because with the villain of the movie being the entity, which does not have a physical manifestation, nor would I want it to. Like, I think I heard another podcast being like, "What did you want? Like Ultron?" Like, because someone complained that if the villain is invisible, like, what are we supposed to latch onto as viewers or whatever, right? So I know, like, he's supposed to be kind of like the human avatar, kind of serving the interests of the entity. But because of that, it just, like, he wasn't really fully formed as a character. And then, like, I liked that we got to learn a little bit about the origin stories, though, of like what Ethan's life was pre-IMF. Like, that seemed cool in concept to me. But I feel like they just kept showing the same flashback of this random woman I don't know dying, and Gabriel being like, looking at him, being like, I'm here. And that's it. Like, and I don't, and again, like, maybe this is solved in part 2 because we find out what actually happened. I'm hoping that's true. But in this movie, it just seemed like kind of like a thing we flashed to a bunch of times, but it didn't actually mean that much to me. So I don't know how you guys felt about that.
I really liked Gabriel as acolyte of the entity. I did not like Gabriel as ancient nemesis of Ethan Hunt we've never heard of. So that's the layer I would peel away. Again, it's also a little confusing to me because it seems like he entered the service because he was framed for murder or looked guilty of this murder of this woman. But it also very much looked like it was a mission already when that, like, in those flashbacks. So I think I'm looking for clarity on that. You're right. I'm sure part 2 has like a long flashback, like full scene of that. But I also thought, like, why do you have to invent somebody new for this? Like, if your point is Ethan Hunt, sacrifices his women to achieve his mission. Jen, I don't know if you know this, Thandui Newton's in the second one. Maybe you didn't make it as far as her. But like, flashback to her. How crazy would that have been? I mean, or I forget the actress's name, but is it Claire in the first movie? Like, yeah, like, they've all been disposable all the way through. Nobody knows what happened to Paula Patton from the third. Maybe she's coming back at some point. Like, there are options within the franchise that would have been more fulfilling and not fan servicey necessarily. Or hell, throw the old footage in and be like, look at how many times you've watched him do this, and think again, like, would he save Grace? Like, is she any different?
Right. I think the only problem logistically with that is that all of the alternatives that you named are post IMF, right? And wasn't the whole point was that this is what brought him into the IMF? And maybe we just don't need that layer at all. But then I think that doesn't feed as nicely into Haley Atwell's arc, or Grace's arc, I should say, of like, she was just like him before joining the IMF, right? And that she has the choice. And I feel like that's probably why they did that, because it fits nicely into the, like, they all had to make this choice at one point because they were kind of boxed into a corner with the way their lives were going, and they had the choice. And I really like that scene where they're all standing around the room being like, yeah, like, this is what you do. Like, it with Simon Pegg and Ving Rhames, I like all of them standing around Grace, and I like her formation as a character made a lot of sense to me. And so I wonder if, like, it's just purely because the purpose of it for her character was to be like paralleling her with Ethan, like early Ethan. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree that is the idea, and I think it ties into an idea. I keep helping you set up segues and then tearing them down because I want to keep talking about something else. But it sets up well of something that we have coming up on our doc, that is the sort of like humans having choice, and then but the algorithm is sort of running the data, and ended up being sort of like predestination and being able to predict accurately what people will do based on past decisions. And so the choice and the concept of it being a choice is important. But I just didn't like it here, the Ethan Hunt backstory. And maybe it will look better after however they unfold it in part 2. I don't know. And I'll give Greg, again, segue that I will destroy. Greg, a chance, he can chime in. This whole like flashback to me was what I thought of when you said, I think there's stuff that was definitely put in here to set up part 2. Like, that felt like all these little scenes are like, okay, we're going to get this scene in full later in the end part of the movie, or the second part of the movie. But to me, it felt a lot like when I went, and I'm again, potential age difference. I remember going to the theater to see Back to the Future 2, and then the movie being like, you guys remember how Marty McFly hates being called chicken? And it's like, no, like, what? Like, that's not in the first movie. It's like, no, well, he does. And it's really important for what we're going to do for the next 4 hours. That felt similar, where it's like, good how Ethan Hunt like lost a woman, and that's why he joined the IMF. And it's like, wait, what? He did? Like, did he? And it's like, yeah. Anyway, that's super important for what we're going to do here. And
I heard multiple critics ask other critics in their podcasts, being like, "Did I miss something? Like, was that referencing something I don't remember?" And like that, and that's not good. That's not good if that's people's reaction.
Well, and it is interesting because there's so much in the last couple of movies, though, the sort of full Macquarie experience that have been like, I do not accept losing someone. Like, I will choose Baldwin says to him, you will choose the individual life over the collective good. And that's why, like, I'm with you. That's why I support you. And so, like, the idea of, like, all of this started because he couldn't save someone. And so now he's just trying to save sort of everyone, but also, save like the individuals around him. And then the entity is setting up that there's this is you can't save both people, a real sort of Dark Knight type thing of like, you got to choose one or only one's going to end up, whatever. But it was just clunky because it ended up just feeling like, the whole thing with Ethan is that a girl got fridged back in the day, so now one of his girls is going to get fridged now, but maybe he'll be able to save another girl. And it's like to Jen's point, it's like they stop being individual characters, and they are just talismans that he is trying to collect and protect, which feels toxic in a way that these movies don't normally aren't. So I'm fully with Greg. I really liked Gabriel as this sort of like, I don't know, man, like, I'm on team entity, like this is going to be great, or this is where the power is, and I'm going with him. So I'm doing that. And if he was just this sort of, like, invisible person who shows up and does that would be great. But this sort of shoehorning in of like, and actually he's Ethan's biggest nemesis. It's like, I don't think so. And I don't care. I would love to be proven wrong, or I'd love to have that feeling be taken away in the next movie. But yeah, that's the thing that I feel is the most excisable, that I think would lead to a better experience, and I think would also make the AI plot feel less quote unquote convoluted for people, because I thought the AI stuff was all pretty clean, for something that was bonkers, but I thought that it all kind of made sense. It was just when it was like, and it's also tied to Ethan's past, it's like, wait, what? Like, it is. That felt like the extra, like, ingredient that kind of spoiled the recipe a little.
Yeah, that's a really smart observation, because I think if you take away conversations that Gabriel has with Ethan, sort of taunting him about their past, or conversations that Ethan has to have about other people, about like he has the conversation with Luther, and Luther's like, you can't kill him, right? Like, that's what the entity wants you to do, and I know how much you want to, and like but I think if that's not there, then there's so much more space for actual monologues from Gabriel about his philosophy about the entity, and like why is he following the entity, and like why is the entity good, and like why, and more of the kind of cult leader, kind of crazy, like freaky, like terrifying villain stuff. But the thing is that I think the plot that they set up, they can't do that, right? Because then there's the whole, the entity knows that Ethan's the only one, and clarify if I get any of this wrong. The entity knows that Ethan's the only one who would want to kill it. And so it has handpicked Gabriel, plucking him from Ethan's dark past, so that Ethan, like, as bait for Ethan, because he knows that he will kill him, and therefore not, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's some convoluted, like, ripple effect that is laid out, that if Ethan gives in to his emotions and kills Gabriel, that's going to actively hurt his quest to find the key and kill the entity, right?
I believe that's right.
Yes.
It's clean, very simple.
I think so. Your question about how the plot gets convoluted, I think it is that, right? That there are multiple moments in the film where the film is like, this is what we need to do, except, oops, it knows we're going to do that. And so here's what it's doing to think about this. And, I think Luther says you're playing 3-dimensional chess with an algorithm. And like, there is a way in which the movie likes to just say, like, it is that complex, but that doesn't really matter, right? A little bit of Austin Powers 2, where it's like, and I don't think you should ask those questions either, right, dear viewers? So I think it's right to say that the algorithm would have recruited Gabriel. The way the movie seems to work to me is the algorithm sees the only threat to its existence is Ethan. everybody else will fall, everybody else will fail, so I need to take out Ethan. And so
Well, and it's a moral argument too, right? Ethan's the only one who has no self-interest and therefore will want to do the right thing and kill the entity.
Yes.
Right?
And
okay. Keep going.
Just on top of that, the algorithm or the entity is Ethan as well, right? So Carrie Elway sets up this other doubling. You talked about there are many doublings in this. And so to see that, to me, this is like we've done the spy versus spy. Solomon Lane was Ethan's equal as a spy. Now what if we made AI Ethan that it can just do everything Ethan can do but faster, and it can, is unpredictable in the same way as is the rogue agent. And so all the movie flows from the fact that it has to stop Ethan from destroying it. And I think where it lost me the first time is I thought the whole point of the opening was that submarine had created the entity. And so the twist that comes late in the movie is that the entity was created by Carrie Elways, I don't know his character name, and was essentially the agent they sent to stop the submarine. The submarine is only stealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's all that's there. But in taking down the stealth, they deployed this rogue agent, the entity, another Ethan figure, right? And now they have lost control of it from there. So the MacGuffin of this movie, and presumably the second, is not to go kill the entity directly, but to go get the source code out of the submarine, which is the only way to then kill the entity. I think that's convoluted. Like, it's tough. Never mind the Gabriel issues we already kind of tried to disentangle a bit. So if critics or audiences are leaving that, I think it can be a little crazy. Now, to PT's earlier point, if you just want to be like, cool, cruciform key looks awesome, we got to go get it. Like, the movie totally works on that level. And who cares who does what? You're just fighting over the key. You can follow it in that way as well. I just want to bracket in one question that is not to be addressed at this second, but I'm going to forget unless I say it. Is Angela Bassett president in this movie? Continue.
Yes. Her picture's on the wall, right?
Yep.
Yes, and it looks like she's in the Oval.
Well, and Carrie Elwes is the head of the CIA, right?
He's
the
National Security.
Okay.
Director of National Intelligence. Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Which is above the head of the CIA, because that was the other option. Is her photos on the wall for being CIA director,
right?
I think DNI is above that.
Yeah, so I think she's president now.
She's president,
which is awesome.
Because of how well she handled the events of Fallout.
Jean-Marc,
swept into office, which is great. I agree that like the sort of the existence and sort of what exactly happened with the AI is convoluted. I do think that it would be easier to sort of be like, okay, sure, whatever, it's an AI and stuff's happening. If it wasn't so also entangled with these flashbacks, that it would be like less of a problem for people to try to like peel back what's going on. If it was just kind of like, okay, there's something happening in that submarine, that's the AI, whatever, like, and we can figure that out. But yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't picked up on that in my viewing, the sort of parallels being drawn between like the entity as sort of like a pure, binary code version of Ethan Hunt, who is the living manifestation of destiny, and the entity is able to determine destiny by predicting what's happening. So that's interesting, and I'm sure that is intentional, but yeah, it's a little bit messy. I think I've respect, and I think it was in many ways the right call to not, like the last few movies, be like, it's a nuclear bomb or it's a nerve gas that's going to do something, which is sort of very tangible and I guess sort of understandable. And instead it's this more, a different kind of existential threat. But I think that meant that the way that McQuarrie and Cruz construct these stories kind of, from the end backwards, led to like more moments where they were like, so where do we explain this? And like, how do we get this across? Whereas like this thing go boom, people die, like makes a lot, like it's pretty easy. It's like, boom, that would be bad. And instead this is like, so like, it's not the Russians that made this, but it was the Americans, mixed with what the Russian sub had is what's gonna, it's like, oh, okay. Like that's, that's going to be a mess. And again, I'm sure it will be a little clearer when it comes out, but maybe it'll just be messy in the same way that some of the twists and turns, to Jen's way earlier point, some of the twists and turns in the first movie led people to be like, what's happening? Like who's in charge? What's going on? Which I think that was more rooted in the Brian De Palma film, like sort of like cinematic choices
the
of
fake
how he
montage.
things. The sort of the lies being like voiced over the montage of the truth. It was, I think, the big sort of sticking point in that first movie. Whereas this is more like, we created a big bad and a related MacGuffin that we cannot explain in 15 seconds like we could in all the other movies.
And yet, the thing that I think did really work about the entity is really tapping into a sense of fear of how easy it would be for an AI to trick us. So, like, for me, the most chilling moment in the whole movie is when Benji is giving Ethan directions, and then the entity takes over, and Ethan has no idea. And to me, like, that really was like, this movie did a really good job at illustrating how AI could be doing stuff we don't even know. In a way that actually, to be honest, when I first was watching it, I was very uncomfortable because it almost feels like too close to home, where it's like, oh yeah, like that could be happening to me right now. Like, maybe I'm not even in this theater, right? Like, but, and I feel like that moment was the most chilling. And all of the stuff where it's like the AI, and actually the opening scene, I think, I was kind of like confused because it didn't have, we can get into this all, but apparently this is not the only time a Mission Impossible movie has opened without Ethan. But I was kind of like, where's Ethan? Why are we on the submarine? What's going on? I guess this is like, I didn't go Hunt for Red October. I went K-19, the Harrison Ford.
Like, as most people do, they go right to K-19, the Widow. When they don't go to U-571, they're like, well.
And I was like, well, okay, I guess this is what this movie is now. But I think it did a really good job of showing the panic of like, suddenly the AI is doing stuff and making things go wrong, and there's really nothing anyone could do about it. And there's a bunch of moments like that throughout the movie. Like, I think the Benji moment is the most powerful because we really do see like, oh no, Ethan is just gonna like run the wrong way. And he has no idea. And like, they had this idea that we trust information that might not be trustworthy. I think that to me was like really, really well done, and really was scary in a way that worked. And so I think that like so the way that it's framing AI as a contributor to a post-truth world that we live in, I think was really good. And I think that's the part of the AI theme that really worked for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I want to come back to that, the sort of post-truth component, when we get to the rhetorical situation down the road. But to speak to the opening, it's interesting. And looking back now, I'm starting to get more excited about the point Greg raised, which is a sort of Ethan entity parallels or connections, is that that scene was unfolding, and I was like, yeah, Hunt for October vibes. That I did think that, especially the sort of Russian merging into English, and I was like, this is great. I'm very excited for when one of these Russian guys rips their face off and it's Ethan Hunt. I was waiting for that. Like, I assumed that was going to happen, but instead the face ripping off is the entity. Like, that's who like reveals itself in that scene and is the one who's doing
green dots to red dots, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the mask.
And the little blue, doesn't the blue eye appear like in the computer?
Well, and to further that point, the excellent scene in Carrie Elway's office, which does play very differently when you know that Carrie Elway's is asking these people to explain the entity to him, even though he created the entity and knows exactly what it is already. That then Kittredge describes Ethan, but he's essentially describing both again, right? Like, so you have a problem and you just send word. It's like, yeah, that's what the entity was supposed to be, right? Like they just send the word and the entity take care of it. Also, shout out Chris Parnell is in there killing it. Good to see Warlock back in the saddle. Indira Varma, recently of Kenobi and formerly of Game of Thrones. I became obsessed on second viewing with the way she's sitting. Everybody else is like perched properly, and she's like reclined with her
leaning.
legs crossed. Like, she's owning this room, and I have no idea who she is, like as a character and all that. And PT, maybe you know who's the comedian who speaks.
It's Rob Delaney.
Rob Delaney, yes, also kills it. So
is he?
That's just
he's in Catastrophe, right? Which was the Carrie Fisher.
Oh, I didn't watch. I need to watch.
Sharon Hogan or Horgan is the Irish comedian who he co-wrote it with, who did Bad Sisters recently. Anyway, yeah, that's a great show. He's very funny. And that scene is super fun. And we always obviously like in even like the early Top Gun Maverick trailer when that green bomb goes off and everyone sort of reacts. That was great. That was the scene that felt like, and there were a few moments of this where I kind of felt this was made during COVID, where like when they would like the stylistic choices that Jen referenced earlier, that kind of ties back to the first Mission Impossible, which is the Brian De Palma Dutch angle, like sort of like shooting underneath people and trying to like make things claustrophobic, was great as a visual callback. It also felt like, most of these people were not in this room when they filmed it, or they had to film them all sort of individually. And there was like a degree sometimes where it felt like conversations were a little bit disconnected, and that's just something that I think as time goes on feels a little more potent across many movies, where it sort of feels like, or like, you film this in like, if you're supposed to be somewhere, you filmed it in a green screen, then you put something on in the background, to be safe, which is good. Everyone should be safe. And there's not as much of that because it is Mission Impossible. They film outside, they film in locations. But that office scene in particular felt like there was never more than like two of these named actors we just talked about in that room at one time, except for maybe like a couple of establishing shots, and then they shuffle.
You're saying a full Fast 10 component.
Yes, I mean I appreciate the references to Fast 10, a movie I'll never watch, but yeah, every
actor in that film.
I thought of the West Wing. I was like, I thought
Sorry.
of the West Wing. I was like, all these people would be awesome on an episode of the West Wing. That's what that scene told me.
That would be great.
Yeah. Also, why does no one notice that Tom Cruise's disguised character is in the corner? Like no one cares that he's just unpacking a briefcase.
Well, I think that they said that like it's Kittredge's assistant, right? Because when he gets the phone call, he's like, "Oh, your dude got like was found at his home, like knocked out, but he also just scanned in." So I think he's basically just like his personal assistant or secretary.
Yeah,
who, it's like, he shows up and he's getting like a tea ready for Kittredge, like because he seems very like needy, and so everyone's just like, whatever.
But it's Body Man, right? It's Charlie from the West Wing, right?
Exactly.
So it's Kittredge's Charlie.
True.
Or Tony Hale from Veep.
Correct. And Bagman is like a criminal. So yes, Body Man.
There we
go. Since you brought up I don't think I actually have anything to add about the Dutch angles. I said all my.
Let's talk through your Mission Impossible 1 parallel. So what do you got on your list that you think draws it together? So Dutch angles.
Yeah, Dutch angles and just the type of plot, that it's a plot about people's motivations and we don't know what they are yet, right? They're revealed later. Like, to me, the reveal that Carrie Elways, that two things. One, that Kittredge was the buyer, and that Carrie Elways, on top of that, Carrie Elways is like the actual bad guy, right? who is trying to eliminate witnesses, essentially, right? Because it's like there's a moment where he says like, "Are you the only one that knows?" Hey, who's he? I can't remember now. Are you the only one who knows that the submarine's at the bottom of the ocean or something like that, right? And then he kills.
Well, that's Gabriel kills Carrie Elways. Carrie Elways is like, I'm indispensable because I'm the only person who knows the location like the coordinates where the
And
submarine.
he's great, so I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah.
Right.
But all of that stuff really reminded me of Mission Impossible 1, right, with the John Voight character, and like how it's like you think one thing through most of the movie and then it's this other thing. But then just in general, the throwback to Kittredge, because like actually people listening to this, if they haven't watched Mission Impossible 1, might not know Kittredge is the main antagonist from Mission, other than John Voight, who's like, and I guess we're spoiling this movie if you haven't seen it, but that's okay. You were warned.
Mission Impossible 1, here's the ending.
Yeah. But Kittredge is a direct holdover from that movie. Like he's the one in the beginning who. So now I'm like, maybe if you've seen it, but it has been a really long time. Kittredge is the one that Ethan meets with initially, and Ethan thinks that he's going to help him, and then he's like, no, like evidence points to you're the mole, and then they blow up the fish tank in the restaurant, and then he runs away. So
red light, green light.
So yeah. So yeah,
the fish tank that holds a restaurant full of water, which that's fine.
It's a choice.
To quote Emilio Estevez, "Hasta lasagna, don't get any on ya."
Anyway, so I was actually really surprised that yes, Kittredge's voiceover was the trailer, right? Like, and he's prominently featured in the trailer, but this whole movie is framed from his perspective. Like the exposition we see in the trailer is essentially the bookend of the movie, right? And I just thought I was surprised by this choice. And I also, and maybe you two can help me out here, I was also kind of confused by this choice. Like I didn't understand why the movie is being told from Kittredge's perspective, essentially. Like why is he our narrator at the beginning and at the end?
That's an interesting question.
And then I kept being like, well, and the other inconsistency with the Kittredge character was I really liked that in the scene with Grace, Ethan's explaining who Kittredge is and is like, she's like, can I trust him? And he's like, no, but I trust that he will he recognizes value, right? So like he will want to use you in the way that he has wanted to use me over the years. And so I thought that was really good. But then when we get to Grace confronting Kittredge on the train, she says, Ethan Hunt says you're a man I can trust. And is that intentional?
Yeah, I think she's lying.
Because she's trying to trick him into thinking that she trusts him even when she knows what's up.
Right. I think that she's saying that because she thinks that Kittredge will want to believe that he's sort of like got that power over Ethan of like, haha, he trusts me. When Ethan's really like, no, but like he's predictable. But what, and one thing I, like about Kittredge, and I think is another parallel between 1 and 7, maybe a little less so in this one, but in the first movie, like he's like he's an antagonist, but he's not doing anything wrong. Like, he's not like evil or bad. He's just sort of like, all the evidence points to you and I'm going to get you. And he's like, yeah, it does. Like that's what John Voight was doing, was setting Ethan up. And so like, and in the end, he's never just like, well, I'm going to get you anyway, because like, that's what I set out to do. He's just kind of like, yeah, all right, well, the evidence changed. And so that's fine. He does send the poor guy who was in the Langley room to wherever he did, like Alaska or wherever he sends him. And
I
do believe
something to make him sick.
Right. I do believe that guy's also back in the next movie, which is going to be fun. I have no idea how that will connect, but the actor's back at least. So that's cool. But yeah, like, I mean, this one, it's a little bit more like, well, he is trying to get like the entity that will control all power, but like every country's doing that. Like he's not like any worse than anybody else. That is probably like the thing that the director of the CIA or whatever his title is would want to do. But yeah, he isn't like intentionally trying to like, do something evil beyond like be a part of the intelligence community, which, is I think notable in that he doesn't really have ulterior motives beyond just sort of like, I'm doing my job. That's the job, as President Bassett would say.
I would just, I hate to beat a drum, but I think it's another doubling, right? Kittredge is trying to control Ethan the way Cary Elwes is trying to track down his entity, right? And so just first of all, shout out that they brought him back. I was so excited when they announced Henry Czerny would be back. Apologies for pronunciation. Because it is very cool. And this franchise has not done this. I mean, the Fast franchise does this all the time. It's like whoever you saw is coming back. But this was like, oh, remember that guy from 6 movies ago? We're going to bring him back and imply that he's been here the whole time. So I just was so excited, and it delivered on mine. But particularly, you know, the fact that you're right, Jen, it opens with his voice and ends with his voice kind of framing all that he's discussing. And he's primarily talking about Ethan, right? And it's a continuation almost of that speech he gives Ethan to his face, which is like, it's a little Top Gun Maverick-y, which it's like the world has moved beyond you and you're a relic in this way. And essentially we have an AI version of you that's going to happen. But I do think, you know, the submarine scene at the beginning throws out Dead Reckoning very quickly. And so everybody's like, yes, the title, we got it. Like, but I do think it's important that it's reckoning in the navigation sense, and reckoning as in like, you have to reckon with everything you've done. And I think Kittredge is another form of that. He's reckoning with the fact that he's created this kind of insane monster that happens to get things done all the time. Who knows for why, except for the quote PT stole for the opening, which was, you know, for those he loves and those he hasn't yet gotten to meet, or will never meet rather. So I think all that's present, but I want to also, to your list of things that replicate Mission Impossible 1, the whole confrontation between Kittredge and the Widow is Kittredge with Max in the first movie, just redone with Max's daughter. And they remind you, they really hit in the last movie in Fallout that this was Max's daughter. And here they just give that little hint that it's, you know, the Widow is allowed to operate and Max before her, because they have a kind of guardian angel.
Because Kittredge allows it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of what she was doing in Fallout was working for the CIA, which was problematic because it was more CIA, IMF in that movie. So there, and just again that it is, Vanessa Kirby killing it, doing her best. Vanessa Redgrave, I think is right.
Yeah.
And so add that to the list. And then the most important of all, Jen, you referenced it in the spoiler section.
The sleight of hand.
The close-up magic, right? That there was this hint in Mission Impossible 1 that Ethan was a very good sleight of hand magician, and we finally get that coming around again for whatever reason. This list is silly. Obviously, just the train and fighting on top of a train again, and like all these things. That wasn't just Indiana Jones. That was also, it's weird we saw that 2 weeks in a row or 3 weeks apart. But I think it's absolutely intentional to say, let's go back to square one and show you how much this character has changed, how much he's lost and how much he's experienced. But I think of it as wiping the slate clean. It's like, we've done it all now. And to me, it's a real signal, like, you have no idea what's coming next, because we've kind of wrapped up this whole experience neatly, and we have another half a movie. So I'm excited to see where that goes. But sorry, that was a lot of pent up ramble, but I think it's dead on to say this is purposely being Mission Impossible 1. The long take review / Jen's Instagram post disrespected Mission Impossible 1, but it belongs up there. It's a little outdated now, but there's a lot of good in there, and it's really cool that Brian De Palma, I think, has had a little bit of a recognition that we've underestimated him. He's an American master, but he never hit the Spielberg Lucas heights despite being in that kind of cohort. I don't know, maybe some De Palma heads are coming to my house now. What? Oh my God, it's Ron Perlman. No. But I do think it's very purposeful, and I expect that means we're in for something totally different next time. But I don't know.
It also makes sense to go back to the first movie if they want us to be thinking about Ethan's time before the IMF. If that's, again, I question the effectiveness of having that be such sort of an important plot hook. But if you are going to have it be, well, this is what things were like in, let's say, 1993, if and 96 then is after he's been in for a few years, then it makes sense to bring us back to that time. The other thing I'll add to all those those great points, two things I'll add. One, I mean, I feel like I was pretty respectful for Mission Impossible 1. I put it at number 4 on my list at the time. No disrespect to that movie, that the last 3 have been better, or the 3 before Dead Reckoning. And the other thing is that to further your entity Ethan parallel, the whole reason that Ethan tells Grace that she can't trust Kittredge, but she can whatever, present herself to him, is because Ethan knows exactly how he can predict exactly how Kittredge will behave, which is how the entity also makes all of its choices.
The whole Ethan is the entity is blowing my mind every time we bring it up.
It's also good because Tom Cruise is a robot, so that makes sense too. That is another good parallel.
Well, yeah, it's just so interesting because it's like the movie is clearly, to me at least, a cautionary tale if it's doing that, right? To be like, well, Ethan as this rogue agent who is highly trained and can do whatever, and basically doesn't report to anybody officially, like somehow he's the acceptable version of something that's outside of your control, but the AI is not, right? Of like, the AI is just going to do whatever and create chaos, whereas Ethan is always been presented as an unpredictable, chaotic force, but one that you can point in the right direction, kind of, what I mean? Like, and is that just because like Ethan is a moral human and the AI is not human, and that's where it sort of breaks down? But it's just interesting that to make the argument against something by way of paralleling it to your main character is fascinating.
Well, and it's also what is the AI done yet? Like, isn't the whole thing that like, well, it hasn't done anything, but it's snuck into all of these systems and just made its presence known and then receded. Like, I know that they talk about like we're in a post-truth world, but I don't know if they say, and I might turn to Greg because he's the only one of us who's seen it more than once, that like I don't know if they say, well, the entity has actually been spreading disinformation or misinformation so much as like people are doing that, and that just affords the entity the opportunity to like accelerate it if and when it chooses to, and we are just worried that it's going to do that outside of that one time it did what it seemed like it was sent to do on the submarine, which is, cause this problem and blow it up. But then right now it's just sort of lying in wait. And so maybe it ends up the entity actually is like in its own way a moral actor and is not trying to destroy the world. It's more that people are scared and are reacting to it. And maybe it's a entity Ethan team up in part 2, and they actually take down the international intelligence system, and that's the end of this series.
Best friend meme, but Haley Atwell's being left behind for the entity.
Haley Atwell no longer best friend, new best friend, the entity.
And Ethan and the entity, Thelma and Louise off a cliff at the end of the film.
but Tom Cruise actually Thelma and Louise is off a cliff, and that's the end of
it's just us against the world. You and me, entity.
He puts his hand out and there's just nothing that goes in it, and then he grabs up the cliff.
I think you're right, and to me that's part of what's brilliant about AI here is so much better than AI has ever been used anywhere else. But it is that combination of fear and opportunity. Where they're all afraid of what it could do. Because you're right. He says it's peeked into all the databases, proved it could do it, and is willing to do it again. And that has caused, just in this room beneath them, that they're trying to type out as analog all the records of the CIA. And that is awesome as just like a set piece of like, here's a million dudes typing on typewriters. They're going to type Tale of Two Cities. And yet then it's also the opportunity. Then it's like, well, it's not that it's about to do anything. It's that we're going to be able to use it to do what we want. And so I was Googling quotes. Another candidate for my opening quote is Kittredge at the beginning. Your days of fighting for the so-called greater good are over. This is our chance to control the truth. The concepts of right and wrong for everyone for centuries to come. You're fighting to save an ideal that doesn't exist, never did. You need to pick a side. So the difference between Ethan and the entity is Ethan's on their side and they can trust him and his ideals. And God, we haven't even mentioned them. The two CIA agents who are trailing him the whole time. There's a moment where one says to the other, like, shouldn't we just let him do his thing? Like, don't you trust that he's doing it for the right reasons? Maybe we should just let him do it. And I think that's what the government has done with Ethan forever, except at this one moment for some reason. I don't know. They're another point where I don't totally understand what they're doing in this movie, other than adding to chase scenes with a third layer at times. And so I think because the entity does not have a side, that's actually more upsetting than anything. Like if it was an enemy, they'd know how to deal with it. If it was a friend, they wouldn't deal with it. But this is like, it doesn't have a side. And that makes me, I mean, we glanced over Gabriel just to make literal what's obvious, perhaps. Like Gabriel is the angel of death who spreads the word of the Lord, right? And so him as direct acolyte, always being the one to, as I understand Gabriel, which is, I think he's in Milton more than he's in the Bible, but I don't know my Bible well, is that he doesn't give the punishment, he announces the punishment usually, right? And
he's
so
like the
states
harbinger.
what's going to happen. Exactly. So as like mouthpiece of Sauron to God, here we again have like, we are, what is God about? But God is an awesome power, right? Something to be feared and something to be loved. And I think that's exactly what they're going for with this entity and the way it functions. And also Tom Cruise, he's to be feared and adored. So
I think the CIA agents who are great. What the older one is Shea Wiggum, who I believe is contractually obligated to be in every HBO show. They keep him in a box on the HBO lot and just like open him up and be like, "All right, you're a preacher or you're a reporter, whatever."
He's playing a lot of cops.
Yeah,
he's always sort of like shifty, shady guy. And Nucky's brother from Boardwalk Empire is how I will continue to initially remember him. But I thought that they were after Ethan because they were like, well, Ethan has the key, or Ethan knows where Ilsa is and Ilsa has the key. And so that's why they were sent initially, was not like to stop Ethan necessarily, but like they were another sort of front in the war of like the CIA needs to get the key or America has to get the key. That was my memory, but I could totally.
I thought it was that when Ethan announces he's going to kill the entity, they get sent after him to stop him. That's what I thought. But I feel like both. It could be both.
Yeah.
Right. They could just be. So
clean. Just a totally clean movie. It all makes sense.
I also, while I was watching, I mean, they're amusing and they add to the comic relief every once in a while in a way that's nice. But I also kind of had the thought of like, why are they here? Like what, like not in the story, but just like in the movie, like what did we really need to pile them on top of all the other stuff? And the main thing I can think of is that, and this is so fascinating as a choice, because I think they actually serve the movie better as contributors to its themes than to its plot, which is like really, and let me explain what I mean by that. So they are one of a series of characters who make a choice at the and make a different choice than we expect at the end, right? So I would group them because you already said it, right? That they're like, oh, what if he's right and we're the bad guys? Like they kind of they start to question their own mandate and like which side they're on by the end of the movie. And I think one of them actually does, right? I think and I'm not going to remember his name. That's terrible. But Shea Wiggum's lieutenant, let's say, right? He's the one who's like pretty early on is like, this doesn't feel right. Like, what are we doing? And maybe he's the good guy and we're the bad guys. And like, and so I would group them. They have a little bit of a turn where they choose something different than what I've been told. And then I would group them with Pom Clementief's character, because she is the thing where Gabriel predicts it, but she still makes the turn of Ethan spared her life in the alleyway, and then she decides to betray Gabriel and help Ethan, right? And then Grace, I think all of this is revolving around Grace, because the Grace character starts out as being self-serving, doesn't care about anything else, doesn't care about the greater good, right? It's just, and is always kind of looking to her next score, right? They kind of imply that she doesn't really have a plan for her life, right? She's just always been kind of skating from one thing to the next. And then Ethan offers her this choice to present her to, wait, so there's stuff in the chat now, clarify. So PT says Greg Tarzan Davis is Shea Wiggum's partner.
That's the actor's
name.
Yes.
And then is wait, who's Coyote?
He was Coyote in Top Gun Maverick.
Top Gun Maverick.
Oh,
He plays Coyote.
Oh, I forgot about that.
I was also Googling Shea Wiggum and realized he was George Stacy in Across the Spider-Verse, which was an amazing performance too.
Whoa.
So, these guys, what we're experiencing here is like, this cast is so stacked, it's kind of a forgettable role, and yet they're really important, good actors. So,
props to them.
But sorry, Jen, you were in the middle of a great point, and we started just like chatting to each other, being like, "Okay, the teacher's lecturing. We're just gonna."
No, I mean, I was basically at the end of my point anyway. But to me, it's like the idea that the Grace character and to me, the better version of this movie is the one that just focuses on Grace as a new Ethan Hunt. And her formation as a new Ethan Hunt. So, like, I think if we start with her character as just like this, like fast and loose con artist, right, who's always kind of like flitting from passport to passport and like she's stealing this and stealing that, and she's always constantly on the run, and that's kind of like no life. There's no real life for her there or whatever, right? And then by the end of the movie, she's accepting the choice and presenting herself to Kittredge to be like, I want to join the IMF, right? That's a huge arc for that character, and I feel like all of these other more minor characters are echoing kind of her realization, and then it plugs back into the AI thing because it's this idea of choice versus predestination, right? The AI's whole thing is like it can write your story for you, right? And all of these characters are making choices that seem like it's like them having free will to write their own stories, as opposed to having someone else predict it and dictate it for them.
I think that's right, and so smart to pinpoint the fact that choice is a part of this story in a major way, and that's why I think some of the critics have been like, what stinks about these movies? The scenes between the action set pieces, and they're not wrong. They're tough hangs compared to jumping off a cliff, but almost all of those are what you're saying are about choices. Like, we should make this choice. Oh, we can't make this choice, or how do we know it doesn't know we know that we made this choice? And so I think the film seems to be coming down on choice not mattering or being so predictable, and yet it seems like the only hope is to make choices that are so unpredictable that it can't figure it out. Like, it won't figure out you're going to jump off a cliff. And yeah, it seems like that's an unsettled question. I can see the whole next movie being about the craziest, weirdest choices, almost like Everything Everywhere. They're just going to like pull out gum from other people's mouths or whatever. But it could be, let's break the algorithm this way, or maybe it's going to be that no, even if your choice is predictable, your choice still matters. And maybe there's a piece of Ilsa's choice that might reinforce that, right? Like, the whole idea that one of them had to die that night is still too convoluted to me. But like, the fact that she knew she was going to die if she stuck around, and she stuck around. I mean, they say that about her at the beginning. Ethan always gets her out and she comes back, and she could have just run like he said, but she said, no, I'm going to come back and I'm going to save Grace, I guess, by dying. I don't know. That's emotionally, I don't like that part of the movie, so I haven't been able to like grapple with it
parse
intellectually.
It out,
yeah, it's tough.
Wait, Greg, what was it you said? He always gets her out and then she comes back in Dead Reckoning Part 2?
Could be.
I do think that this, the end, one of the end points of this long, taken together, the Dead Reckoning story across the two movies is going to have to be Ethan Hunt making a choice that is unpredictable, which like I mean, my initial instinct on it is like, he's going to kill one of like his friends. Like, he's going to have to do that because that's his whole thing is I never, I protect my friends at all costs. I never sacrifice them. And he will like make that choice to like undermine what the algorithm does. Yeah. Which
Mission Impossible opposite day. Basically what we're describing.
Well, Dead Reckoning, right? So the navigational sense, right? Like when you've lost all your signposts and don't know how to navigate, then what do? I'm just going to put in my careless speculation. I'm in the camp that thinks this is building to Ethan's death. There's a lot of Jesus in this movie, right? Besides the Gabriel we already talked about. The whole MacGuffin is a cross. It's let me unite the halves of the cruciform key. And damn it if I didn't every single time be like the brother of the cruciform sword. But it's a key, the cruciform key. He goes a wandering in the desert to atone for his sins and then comes back. And so it just seems to me this is building to Ethan finally sacrifices himself to save the world. I don't know. Maybe that's been done too much lately. I won't random spoil other franchises, but there's a franchise that's awful similar to this and is in a cold war with this one where they just did this. So maybe they won't.
The only, I think that makes a lot of sense. And when Jen was saying earlier, like the whole story revolves around grace, I was also thinking how like, oh, there's a lot of religious undertones to what's been unfolding. But the only pushback I'll say on that is I don't know if Tom Cruise will ever let himself die.
That's
although it would be very in line with Tom Cruise smart marketing to have him out there being like, I want to be like Harrison Ford and doing this character when I'm 80, when he already knows that he's already filmed the death of his character in the next movie.
It would be like Tom Cruise to think that he could rewrite the Bible, though. Like he'd be like,
but he's
anyone
not
to have the gall to do that.
Because he'll die and he'll be resurrected, right? So, like,
3 days later, he
will
rises
live forever.
Just like his friend Lazarus. I mean, Ilsa.
Oh my gosh, you're not gonna let this go. It's torture because I don't think she's coming back.
I know.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, that would be kind of an epic end to this franchise, but once I start thinking about what we know about the franchise and about Tom Cruise and how he basically just wants to keep doing this forever, then suddenly I'm like, well, then how would that work in the context of this? I'm not sure. But yeah, but if you compare it to John Wick, then having the all but actual death and then
all right, I was actually referencing Bond, so it just shows that 3 of them have done it lately.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. That's right. Right. So but it does feel like we are careening towards some kind of big end point. Right.
Well, and there's so many references to this one to All Out War. I want to believe All Out War is the next movie, and that would be kind of exciting if we had to take this all out of the kind of Cold War and into a hot war. But I don't know. That also sounds really expensive and hard to shoot. So,
and Mission Impossible, from what I'm remembering now, has never really had big military battles in it ever, right?
No.
Like it's kind of the whole point is that it's not that. It's use a scalpel instead of a hammer.
Yeah.
I just realized that like what this is all building towards is Tom Cruise insisting they film in Eastern Ukraine. And just being like, that's the next movie.
No.
Because he just goes into an actual war zone to film part of it.
If there's nothing that we've left behind in the Google Doc, I think we can move on to the rhetorical situation. A lot of this we've already started. Everything that all the like the notes that we had in here for this section, we've already started talking about some of it. So the only thing, deepening it.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say, which because like I feel like we have been talking about, and I think this is partly, at least for me, the like I was excited to talk to you guys about this and the things that kind of stuck in my craw, the things I was worried about. We haven't really talked about the question of like what's your favorite sequence or like what's your favorite like moment, and I think we are all generally positive on this movie with all these things that we're sort of picking at reservations. The Rome car chase is absolutely incredible and is
so good.
One of the best it's one of the best action sequences like probably since like the action sequences in Fallout 5 years ago.
Particularly when They switch seats? Is that what you're going
Yeah,
to say?
yes, that's
Yes.
exactly what I was going to say. How Grace keeps ending up in the driver's seat when she doesn't want to be.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's so funny.
And Palm Clementif just gleefully destroying things with her giant Hummer, and like
Yeah.
how much like joy she's getting out of like running over a bunch of motorcycles was excellent.
She's having a great time. The funniest part for me, actually, like I loved that entire sequence. I thought it was amazing. The funniest part to me was when Ethan has to find a safe car, and then they reveal it's the Fiat, but then he like can't get it to work. And what
Yeah.
he says in that moment, just I was cracking up. Where he's like, "Well, like he's basically trying to make excuses for himself."
Yeah.
Of like, well,
Sometimes
they always set these up a little bit differently, and she's like, like, it's so
Well,
funny.
see, I mean, those are, I'll just say it. Those are impotence jokes.
yes.
It's like brilliant way. And Haley's response is exactly like what a supportive partner would be like. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Of course. Like,
Of
yeah.
course.
Yeah,
Everyone deals with
no,
this
no,
sometimes.
it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. So it's so good. Those are really fun. The Fiat coming out got just uproars of laughter each screening I was at. Like the crowd
Yep,
died.
same.
Perhaps the biggest laugh I've heard in the theater this year so far. Although Helena punching Indy got a huge laugh when I resaw that movie yesterday. So that's also up there. I'm going to just, we should be positive. Let me just in passing say it shocked me the parachute dive was not the opening stunt. I thought they were marketing that so heavily because it would be like the plane in the fifth one, that it was like, hey, we're just in the middle of an adventure and you see this. But the fact that it built to that, I was like, oh, this is like the big stunt is crazy. But for me, the train, and if I don't know if you all saw, when I saw Indiana Jones, they had a behind the scenes piece on the train falling. And they showed, so they really threw a locomotive off a bridge, and then they dangled the train cars. They built each of those train cars from scratch. So they designed every element in them, every piece of the kitchen, every piece of the dining car, and then they gimbaled it sideways and had them climb up through this train, and they just slowly destroyed it. And particularly, that the athleticism of that, there are some digital effects, particularly like the sand or the rocks crumbling on the thing don't hold up that well and kind of are obvious. But what the two of them did to get through that train is just really amazing and incredibly well choreographed. Again, a shout out to the editing too, that it's all incredibly clear. And it's like, I am sure Neil deGrasse Tyson is already ready to like debunk the physics of it, but it's like, oh, okay. Each time one of these is falling, it tips way up, and then the next one slams down. It's like, I get it, and I get to see that and knew exactly what was going on. So that was my favorite. Is from the locomotive crash through the end of that sequence.
I thought that sequence was paced really well too, because it's sort of like, because each car has different stuff in it, it kind of escalates, or like there's a reveal of like, oh no, there's a piano. Right? What is that gonna do? Yeah, I thought that part of the train sequence, I think, was my favorite of the whole movie. Mm-hmm. Where because there's so much at stake between the two of them as well, in terms of like she's sort of forced to trust him with her life. But it's also like a point, I think it's a turning point for her character, where she really is forged in the fire in a lot of ways, where it's like she goes from, when we first meet her, to she's just basically a really good pickpocket, and then the realization of the car chase, where it's like, oh, she's not a spy, right? She's a thief, she's not a spy, so she doesn't really know how to do a high speed chase. So that to me made it really believable that she would be sort of like on unfamiliar territory in a situation like the train car is falling.
Yeah, there was an article yesterday, I think, sometime over the weekend in the LA Times, that was specifically about the making of the train sequence. It talked about to Greg's point of like, they did some of it in a studio where they had it like hanging, but they also did have it like hanging over some a high height, and Haley Atwell talking about how like Tom was like, just don't, you should not look down because like you can see the trees and they're very far away. And at the moment, which I think got the biggest laugh, even bigger than the Fiat, in when the piano is like starting to fall, and Ethan is just like, okay, like I'm gonna jump over there, and then you're gonna jump, and I'm gonna catch you. And he's like, do you trust me? And she shakes her like, no, like I absolutely don't. And but that apparently was improvised because that was what Haley Atwell was feeling in that moment. Was just like, no, I don't trust any of this. This is crazy. And it made it into the movie. I'm going to go slightly negative. The last negative thing that I had was I feel like it felt like there were more CGI touch-ups in this than there have been in the last few, and there always are those little like touch-ups. In rewatching them, you're sort of like, oh yeah, I guess like there is some moments where it looks like, maybe Tom Cruise isn't riding a motorcycle without a helmet through the middle of Paris all the time, but the other cars at least are green screened in afterwards, or whatever, composited in afterwards. But I did feel like it was to the detriment of that scene that like there was enough times where they were touching up the things that were falling, or maybe it was like the background, like what was happening sort of outside the train car looked like it got a little touched up digitally, where I was like, in my head, I was like, I know they filmed this practically because I've heard enough about it and seen some photographs of it, but it doesn't look as real as like the jumping out of the, hanging on the side of the plane, or jumping out, doing the helo jump in Fallout. Or the Burj Khalifa thing. And so I think that was somewhat of a detriment, because it looked like, oh, well, this is all fake, so whatever. But the sequence is great, and the pacing. And again, in that article, McQuarrie talks about how like, he snuck a suspense scene into his action movie. And so instead of the climax of the movie being a big action thing, it is this very slow, kind of deliberate, literal slow motion train crash of just trying to climb up and going kind of step by step, which I thought was great. And that was probably in second place for me. I'm just going to give an honorable mention to the airport. I think it's Abu Dhabi, the airport thing where you got Simon Pegg working on the bomb and Tom Cruise is trying to avoid people. That was just a great, like, a classic, like, first act, end of first act, Mission Impossible. Like, we've got like 5 or 6 characters, each sort of with their own motivations, doing their own thing.
And how they don't want to tell him, that was the best part for me.
Yeah,
they don't want to tell him. And there's one moment where Ethan slipped away, and then you've got like a good shot of Shea Wiggum and Greg Tarzan Davis being like, well, what the hell, where is he? Like, he's got to be here somewhere. And like, it kind of like the camera moves enough that you can see like in the background, like Ethan's like doing it's a Tom Cruise running on the roof. And it's just like, well, I know that's Tom Cruise because I know that only Tom Cruise can run that way. So he was really, up on the roof running just so you could see his silhouette through sun-soaked windows.
Probably in like 120 degrees, which I'm only
and probably
now.
He was like, I need to do 10 takes to make sure I hit it. One other thing I'll say is I think because we saw so much of it, I think it actually, like, I loved watching the behind the scenes thing about the motorcycle jump into the parachute. I think the actual, impact in the movie for me was muted because it was like cooler to watch the behind the scenes thing than what we actually got. But it also almost felt like that was edited to, like, with the knowledge that like a bunch of you have already seen this, so like we're gonna kind of move past it. Like, you think this is a big deal, but we're gonna get back to the train, and we actually want you to forget about Ethan for a minute, so like we can have him crash into the scene literally. But I did see I think it was Simon Pegg posted, or at least it's a video from Simon Pegg of like the rest of the cast being there, which was not in the sort of behind the scenes thing, but it's like him, Rebecca Ferguson, Shea Wiggum, Greg Tarzan Davis, Vanessa Kirby. They're all just off to the side, and it's them like watching him do it and them being like, holy crap, like this is it. And Simon Pegg is like, every movie, this is every movie. He's just, we're just seeing, and like we have to just deal with it. And like it, like they end and they get the like of like, yeah, it was great, like he landed, it's fine. And Simon Pegg starts crying because like it's like he's clear that he just thinks that like he's going to watch Tom Cruise die, like making one of these movies.
Right.
And
that's so funny to think that like the fear has not worn off, or he's still just as like worried for him
Yeah.
for Tom Cruise. Oh my goodness! My favorite part of the motorcycle jump was actually like the lead up to it, where he keeps he keeps being like, "All right, I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna go here," and then finally he says to Benji like, "All right, what am I supposed to do?" And he's like, "Jump!" Like, and he's like, "What?" Like,
my opening
quote was really funny.
And now I wish this had been my opening quote, so I didn't take Craig's. But my opening quote was almost, "When do I start going downhill?" Because I think that was the best part of it. And he's like, "Pretty soon."
All so my wrong prediction in my seat was that the AI was leading him up the hill, because all of a sudden Simon Pegg is using satellite tracking and a self-driving car. I'm like, didn't we just have a long talk about using analog technology? It was wrong, or it wasn't a piece of that. So
I feel like that's probably what we're gonna. I'm hoping that's what we get in part 2, is that they have to strip down, like they basically have to figure out ways to do all the things they would normally do, but without the digital technology, right? And go analog, go like find the equivalent of the CIA's like Cold War room, right? That hasn't been used in 20 years or whatever, and do more of an analog problem solving. I think that would be really fun.
Agreed.
But I guess we're on predictions for Dead Reckoning Part 2. Greg, let it rip.
Geez. I mean, so I was on, I'm not on Twitter because I'm too woke. So I was on Threads this morning, and McHugh was answering questions, and somebody said, "What's the answer to the question we should be asking, but nobody is," or something like that. And he said 15. And I'm like, okay, so there's a giant stunt that Tom Cruise had to do 15 times next time, is immediately where my head went. I mean, I think this brand has become bigger and bigger spectacle. This is not the movie that Tom Cruise is going to space for. I think that's a different movie, right? But it almost feels like we have to go to space. Like he'll be the only one who can go shut down the satellite that the entity is in, or something. There's also a ton of casting news out there, which it's we added so much and we're going to add more. I have to imagine some of the people we met this time around won't be back, but Rebecca from Ted Lasso, Hannah
Waddingham.
She's in the next one. I mean, maybe she's just in a booth or in a room talking through something like some of these figures we've talked about today. But, and it was funny because I think you all talked about, I spent my London vacation finding Mission Impossible things around London. And there was no London in this one, which is very different for this franchise. We've been in London, I think, not in number 2 and maybe not in the 3rd, but every other one has had something in London, I think is right. Or
that sounds right.
Check the tape on that. But so I'm expecting some London. They did film a bunch in the UK. I think most of the train was actually done in the UK, but I want some London. And I think the doubling is going to be present in the form of Grace and Ethan. I think Grace might be the person on the inside now, right? Because if she's really becoming an agent, she's not going to just be at Ethan's beck and call, right? And then last irresponsible speculation, I said this when Jen pointed to the picture of Tom Cruise eating popcorn like a normal human, just pretending he could eat. I mean, no way he didn't just spit that out.
It looks so
right?
wrong.
Yeah. He's got really long hair right now. Not quite Mission Impossible 2 throw on some Oakley's hair, but the hair is long. So I'm expecting a time jump between these films. And I'm not sure how long it will be, but could be long, could be decent.
You don't think he had long hair in the past, and that's for the flashback scenes?
I mean, brilliant if they take us back to Anthony Hopkins' Mission Impossible 2 times, but because it's not exactly any previous. If you listen to the Light the Fuse podcast, every time they have a famous guest on, they ask them to rank the hairstyles, not the movies. Like, rank the hair through these films, and it's not like any of the previous. I don't think it feels a little different. It's not Mission Impossible too long. Mission Impossible 3 is like a little long. Mission Impossible 2 is like what the one Harry Potter movie where all the kids suddenly have long hair and then they all go back to crew cuts after. So I feel like I think it's some new time period. So that's my guess.
I like it. I mean, my easiest prediction is it's not going to make it's June 28th to 2024 release date. Unfortunately, um, I like all of Greg's predictions. I'll go back earlier. I mean, he said that he thinks it's building up to Ethan sacrifice himself. I think that someone is sacrificed. I think that seems pretty clear. I think it has to be one of Luther or Benji if it's not Ethan, which is, I mean, just a bummer. There is a moment at the end where we have Kittredge doing the voiceover, which it does feel like it's a direct address to Ethan, like as if he's like left a message for him somewhere. And there's something about like, like it's either there will be sacrifices or, there will be great costs. And it cuts to Simon Pegg at that point. So I'm sort of like, I feel like Benji is being set up, and the movies are all about sort of upending what you think. But the end of the movie felt like, oh, I mean, I think Benji's going to be cooked by the end of the next one, which I wouldn't love. But, if the idea is we're getting closer and closer to the end, that seems possible. I also, is this irresponsible speculation? Probably. I think they get to the submarine way earlier than we think, in the same way that like Thanos was killed in Endgame, like way earlier than we probably expected. I think they get to the sub in the first like half hour of the next movie, and like that isn't what's important or whatever. Like there's a thing. And is that because, oh no, we have to get it's left or the source code's moved. We got to get it somewhere else. Or is it that like the fallout, to use a different installment of what has happened is actually what needs to be unpacked. And again, in the if there are potential endgame parallels, that would be then the moment of like, okay, 5 years later, like what's going on and what's happening. So yeah, I could see that, and I feel like I had other ideas, but I can't remember them right now. So Jen, you can predict.
Sure. I predict that we get a voiceover that's anti-Kittredge. So, because I think in terms of the arc that Ethan's on, that voiceover with Kittredge bookends this movie with, because it's kind of like telling him he's going to have to pay for all the like, it's like, yeah, it's positioning the reckoning, right? But I feel like to counter that, we're going to need to make the character arc emotionally satisfying between these two movies. I think we're going to need someone having to reassure Ethan that he's just doing his best or something like that. You know what I mean? That like, or that he's done so much to help so many people, or like something that's going to be kind of like a little pep talk. Maybe that's like a message from Ilsa posthumously or something like that. If you're reading this, I'm dead kind of thing.
The hologram she left in Iron Man's helmet. Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like there has to be something to kind of like rebut what we got in this film for Ethan as a character. So that's kind of my prediction. The other thing too is like I saw someone post that you can categorize all Mission Impossible movies as some of them are vertical and some of them are horizontal, with the emphasis of the stunts. I think they also this person made the next argument that like all the vertical ones are the good ones. I don't know if that holds up, but I feel like maybe if I feel like because these are two parts of the same story, the stunts are going to have to complement each other somehow, in terms of like, because we can't just do the same thing again, right? He can't just do another motorcycle jump. They're gonna have to change it up. So I don't know what that is. Maybe it's going into space.
Right?
Maybe.
No,
right.
When the preview at one of the producer or the movie vendor thing was him on top of a biplane, but in very like stunt person, like air show fashion. So I don't know. I think they maybe just did that to be provocative.
Maybe it'll be an abandoned helicopter that doesn't have a computer system that's up to date.
It's an F-14 Tomcat. I like the idea that it's like, no, the biplane was not part of the movie. That was just Tom Cruise's weekly biplane standing that he does. Just take me up and I'll stand on this on the wing here.
Maybe Grace is the one that's going to sacrifice herself.
Great. It would be great if another woman died.
Right.
Or Ethan Hunt.
It tracks. But I mean, like for her arc between the two movies to go from she doesn't care at all to being the one who ultimately saves the world. I think that could, other than the fridging component, that could be compelling. Like I could see them writing it.
See, I wonder if will Haley Atwell be the new the person that Jeremy Renner was supposed to be, of like, look, when Tom Cruise finally wants to just switch to producing, or he wants
She's
to be
the heir.
He wants to just be the secretary in these movies. She can be the one who's out on the scene. Now, I do want to, I know we want to get to the rhetorical situation, and I know this is maybe cliche. I just want to real briefly talk about how old Tom Cruise is, because he's not young. He's 61 years old. That's now he's not a normal human being for all the reasons we have discussed. And you know, the Wilford Brimley in Cocoon is always the sort of clear like demarcation line. He's 10 years older than Wilford Brimley was in Cocoon, playing an old man. But poor Wilford was only 51. The diabetes hit hard for him, I guess. But I did do a little like poking around of like other famous actors and where they were in their career and what they were performing. So at 61, Sean Connery was doing his cameo in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves as King Richard. It was a year after Hunt for Red October, 2 years after Last Crusade. So again, so Sean Connery 2 years younger than Tom Cruise is now in Last Crusade. Jack Nicholson was in As Good as It Gets. That was where Jack was at this point. Meryl Streep was in the year between It's Complicated and The Iron Lady. So again, old person roles
in the makeup chair, getting ready.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Tom Hanks, who I feel like, you know, it's like, oh, Tom Hanks, he's like eternally young as well. He was in The Post. He was being Ben Bradley in The Post. Wow. Again, pretty much an old man. Humphrey Bogart had been dead for 4 years. He died at age 57. Tommy Lee Jones in No Country for Old Men.
Wow.
Literally an old man, according to the title of the movie. And at age 61 is the year that Alec Guinness began filming Star Wars as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Which is wild. It's just wild that he's out there doing it, hanging from trains.
I don't know. I feel like he's still got it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise pretty good.
Yeah. He looks good. I don't know. And I feel like I saw an Instagram video that was like someone interviewing him about his training routine, or like, what's your his answer was basically just like he didn't have any secret to it. He was just like, I just try to pace myself. So if I know that I'm doing like if I know how many takes it's going to take to do a running thing, then I make sure the next day I'm doing a jumping thing or something like that. It was really funny. Like how that makes sense. So he doesn't burn himself out or injure himself, I guess maybe is the other thing too. I don't know. Apparently it brings him great joy. And all right, so we're at yet again, we're well over the 2-hour mark, and we're at a crossroads. I think we could either dip into rhetorical situation or do a quick Oscars update. What say you?
I mean, should we can hand wave away maybe the rhetorical situation to say a lot of the stuff about AI and post-truth.
We kind of already talked about it, yeah.
Technology is relevant there as well.
Okay.
All ideas of knowledge and truth, especially in academia, are up in the air right now in much the way these things are. And how do we construct truth? How do we demonstrate knowledge? What is a meaningful way to do those things are open questions in our field right now. Dun 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 dun. Boop. Oscars.
There you go. Done and done. Maybe we'll have more to say about that because our field will have evolved more by the time Dead Reckoning Part 2 comes out. So we can make sure we set aside more time to talk about it then in like 4 years or whenever it actually comes out. But yeah, all the things that Tom Cruise is worried about, we as teachers also worried about, I guess is my short version of that. Anyway, so yeah, Oscars watch. I mean, obviously, as we covered in the other Mission Impossible, the retrospective episode, not a lot of Oscars history here at all. And not a lot of love necessarily. Like, I feel like it's very rare that Mission Impossible movies ever even enter the Oscars conversation. Is any of that likely to change? Or what is sort of the, and then if the answer is just as short, no, then you can throw in some other Oscars stuff.
I think the answer is no. I think Top Gun got the like, hey, you're doing great things for our industry nomination. Even with 10 nominees again, I don't think this rises to that level unless this is somehow an unbridled commercial success. But I always go back to Top Gun was the #1 movie on Memorial Day and Labor Day, and that's madness and just doesn't happen anymore. And nothing this summer is going to do that and be at that level. I think their emphasis on practical effects means they don't get the visual effects nomination other blockbusters do, which is totally fair. But I'm sure
right,
the
and that's
visual
usually the
effects
token blockbuster nomination is
yeah.
visual effects.
The question I want to throw to you two on is, I think we're all in the camp of there should be an Oscar for best stunt, and yet if you have to give it to Tom Cruise, is that like undermining the reasoning behind that, right? Like the idea would be to recognize a piece of the industry that gets too little credit for incredible work. The whole point of these is that he really does this all himself. Whatever level of truth that has on a given moment is up for debate for much of it. So like, oh, we're going to finally do it. And here we're giving it to Tom Cruise. Does that mean it undercuts the point of it? I don't know.
I think it might. I mean, I think the proposal, not an actual proposal, but just sort of talking about it, proposal that I've seen, which makes sense, is that it would be like a best choreography. So it would be stunts, but also potentially like dancing and musical performance type things, and which means it would go to this like the stunt coordinator. So even if Tom Cruise is the one performing the stunts, Tom Cruise and Haley Atwell are in the dangling train, almost all the time, if not all the time. It's the coordinator who like planned it all out and figured it, is the technician who should be awarded for that. I don't think even Tom Cruise would be like, I did that. Like, actually, that was me. And so, I think it would be all right with that. But yeah,
he wouldn't be at the ceremony anyway.
It's true. He wouldn't be. Well, I hate to say it. I said that thinking about how the only competitive Oscar that, I don't even think competitive, the only, from a direct movie, non-honorary Oscar that Stanley Kubrick won was for the visual effects of 2001, which he didn't do. He just oversaw the visual effects people, but he put his name down as like, well, I was in charge, so I did that. And so he got an Oscar, which is, not great, Stanley. Maybe share it, give Douglas Trumbull his Oscar for it. But I think that, since there is no stunt performance or stunt choreography category, the only thing that this movie might get is like a sound, because that is what Top Gun actually won last year. And if there's no other, I think it's really dependent on there being no other, a lack of 5 other movies that kind of have enough technical component to it within the sort of standard pool of contenders for the year that might get that, or if there's no other blockbuster that kind of rises up to the top, and that's both in terms of quality and also commercial success at this point. I think that this came in under expectations for opening weekend in terms of money. They had to sort of shave it down a little. It's actually closer to Dial of Destiny than I think people like predicted. They were like, well, this movie will far outgross it. Worldwide, it did. Worldwide, it made a lot more money, but it actually made almost like within $1 million of indie, which was seen as a big disappointment. And this movie with a similarly large budget is, that's a question mark, but it might have a lot of legs, might end up churning away to be a huge blockbuster. But you've got like, Oppenheimer might also be a big blockbuster. What if like Barbie is like a movie that runs away and gets $500-600 million. And it's just like, well, yeah, Barbie had sound too, so we'll nominate that instead of this. So I think that it has to be like the best received movie that made a lot of money that like by the time we get to Oscar season for it to even like sniff getting into a category. And since it hasn't so far, and I feel like even the people who like this movie are like, well, it wasn't as good as the last few, then that's not a good recipe for any success.
All right, any final thoughts? I think we're gonna wrap up.
Good movie.
Good movie,
Yes.
really fun. I mean, I think it's right when we pick things apart, we tend to get into nitty gritty. Like this should have been 2 hours talking about the stunts and then like a half hour of the plot if you're
Right.
like measuring my enjoyment of it. But it's just not. There's a few things to say about like it's so cool. But it is so cool and really worth seeing. And like PT said, this will be one I watch forever, right? I do think the narrative is going to become the box office tanks next weekend, like huge drop off, not because of the quality of this, but everybody's going to Barbie and Oppenheimer. So who's left to go? And maybe that's why they snuck it out a little early. But I did also want to note, I went to Indy yesterday and it was just about sold out. Now it was in a very small theater
Whoa.
compared to the opening weekend, but like I think Indy's ticking away. I think it just crossed 300 million, right?
Mhm.
So,
Maybe it
which is
has
the
legs.
purported budget, I think. But, I think there's a like, hey, my kids already saw Elemental. Hey, why not? Let's take them to Indiana Jones. I'll at least like it. So there might be some legs there.
I do think the word of mouth on indie is better than the initial reviews made it seem.
Yeah.
I will be seeing it for a second time in 3.5 hours. So I'm
Exciting.
excited for a second dip.
I saw it for my fourth time in the theater where the UK premiere was, and it made my life. So
Nice.
Look at you with your
Could
fancy.
you smell Harrison Ford's musk like
I assumed
lingering
I
in
was
the
in
air?
his chair based on the smell, but
Nice.
there's some musky Brits as well. So if anybody happens to go, they part of the premiere over there is they put up a big statue of Indiana Jones in Leicester Square, so you can go stand with Indy
Oh,
now
that's
and
fun.
pose with him. You all can also do that in California. I know not your part of California, but up in San Anselmo, they have a big Indy
Mhm.
statue. So just adding tidbits
Well,
for
and Jen,
travel.
I will say, I mean, I'm going to the theater where I have the pass because so I don't have to pay extra. But maybe at some point we have to coordinate before. I think there's like 1 or 2 more weeks of it. It's playing at the El Capitan, which is the theater right across from the Chinese theater in the heart of Hollywood, which is the opposite of glamorous. But it's a Disney-owned theater, so it's staying there a little bit longer. Will not be crammed out by Barbie or Oppenheimer, and they apparently have a bunch of the props, including the original Ark of the Covenant is there in
Oh,
the
wow.
Cool.
lobby.
All right.
So maybe we have to
We may
coordinate
need to make that
a
happen.
visit there. Yeah,
This week is all about Barbenheimer, though.
it's true.
2 movies in 1 weekend. That's a lot for me.
And,
So,
and don't forget the theater camp is also expanding for all of
Yeah,
you who are
oh,
interested.
that's right. Yes. Oh, that movie was. I've seen that movie. I saw it at Sundance. It's amazing. It's so funny. If you are at all a theater kid at heart or otherwise, that's a must see. It's great. So yeah, big weekend at the movies. I
What
know I'm gonna be.
are you doing the double feature? And if whether or not you are you which order are you doing? Both of you, I want to
Okay,
know.
so I'm not going to answer this obtusely like Tom Cruise did, uh, where he really tried to say, I'm going to
I'm
see
going
both,
to watch
but
both at the same
he just
time.
can't watch both at the same time. He's not even Tom Cruise. So I am going to see, and this was largely dictated by availability of the IMAX 70 millimeter theater that I live near. Um, so I'm going to see, it's like a 10:30 a.m. showing of Oppenheimer on Friday, and then I'm going to see Barbie Saturday afternoon. Um, it's a mom's day out with a couple other friends, or like
Nice.
friends whose kids are friends with my kids. So that should be, and they're definitely the crowd where like the high nostalgia factor. That's I was like I should go see this with them because like even if the movie is just okay, like it's going to be really fun, like from a trip down memory lane and stuff, because we were already like talking about all the Barbie stuff that we used to have when we were kids, and how our parents saved some of it but not all, like, and so like, and how most Barbie stuff from the 80s is just disintegrating now because the way they just made the toys, like they weren't built to last, reasonably not built to last until now. So but yeah, so that'll be, yeah, so that's the, I'm doing it a 2-day. I'm not, it's an extended lengthier double feature. But it's going to be totally worth it because I did research. I sent this to both of you off mic, but I did research on, there are only like 16 theaters between 15 and 20. I can't remember. I think it's 16, but there's only between 15 and 20 theaters that have the optimal IMAX 70 millimeter setup for Oppenheimer. and the one that's 10 minutes from my house is one of them. So
Nice.
I'm very excited.
That's good. I'm doing the same order. It's spread out across more days because I made the mistake. Well, it wasn't a mistake to travel to Europe, but I was in Europe when the tickets went on sale for Barbie. My mistake was being like, yeah, Barbie's going to be popular, but will it be that popular? And the Alamo Drafthouse, where I now have like the monthly pass, like Greg's Stubbs package. I think they call it the season pass.
Package stubs? That's insulting.
Your package stubs. Is that what's called? AMC Stubs? Am I wrong?
Yeah, I was making a penis joke.
You stub man. That like the whole weekend is sold out. Like every well, I shouldn't say the whole weekend. The like late night showings had some seats, but as I believe mentioned on an earlier podcast, Jasmine has made it clear this is her Star Wars. She's like, I need to see this movie. So then it started to like crash into like her having a job. So we're going on Tuesday. I'm seeing Oppenheimer Friday afternoon, a Friday morning showing as well. Not 70 millimeter IMAX. I'm seeing it 35. I'm going to hold off for the IMAX, the big IMAX, the best IMAX screen in LA at the Chinese Theater that's sold out for like 3 weekends straight. So that, I mean, not sold out, but like, it's all the way on the edges or all the way in front, which I'm not doing. So yeah, the second screening, which will be the Oppenheimer screening with Jasmine, might have to wait a couple of weeks. But yeah, we're going Tuesday next week for Barbie because that's when she's able to get out of work a little bit early, and we're doing like a late afternoon, which was the only one that had two seats next to each other. For that was the first screening we could go to that had 2 seats next to each other by the time we booked tickets. So I got a little delay.
I mean, both of you are just explaining that people who do not love movies are going to Barbie. So I can only think this will be insanely big. They did play the trailer at my Indiana Jones screening yesterday, and all the kids were excited. And so it's like, whatever it is, if it can work on the kind of Lego movie works for kids, but adults really find it fun, I think it's just going to do incredible box office. I, of course, am a real one. So I am going 6:30 p.m. Oppenheimer, 10:15 Barbie, which means I basically have to run across the lobby, I think. AMC, that means they don't actually start for a half hour after that.
Right.
But, so I think
you get time to refill your popcorn.
Right. Yes. Because my package includes lots of free popcorn refills.
But don't underestimate within that how late Oppenheimer is going to actually start at your first screening.
Right. I think I'm good. I did all the math when I ordered. I also accidentally ordered at 2 different theaters and then had to like, wait, nope, I got to go to the same theater complex for these 2. But I have the benefit of going as a single. So it was like everything still had 1 or 2, but you're right that they were starting to look pretty full. This was last week when I did mine. So great for the industry, though, that everybody's excited, and great that it's becoming the weirdest, coolest pop culture double feature of all time, probably.
Yeah. Whoever figured out this was like a marketing opportunity is very smart and not just like an internet meme.
It's not Morbius. It's actually people going to the movie.
All right. So thank you both so much. I feel like this was a very thorough, and actually I know we picked apart the plot a lot, but I actually think for people who have just seen the movie and are listening to us, like, I'd like to think that we were helpful. And I think parsing out like, okay, what's actually going on here, I think is helpful for folks who maybe walked out of there being like, huh? That was cool, but what? So thank you both for doing that. And Greg, we'll start with you. Where can people find you on the internet?
I am on the internet. So I did take the plunge and joined Threads, despite, my my antipathy for that billionaire, but seems to be the less dangerous billionaire at the moment. So I'm on Threads as Ion Cannon, EYEONCANON, or on Instagram, or ioncannon.com, and I am around. Please share your mission love with me. My Instagram does have pictures of me going to way too many Mission Impossible filming locations and trying to pose like the actors, which is very funny because despite my dreams, I am not in the shape of either Tom Cruise or Jeremy Renner, or even in one case, Rebecca Ferguson. So...
And PT, if people want to follow the Long Take review, where do they go?
Yeah, they should go to the Long Take Review on Instagram and also on Threads. And they can follow me at PT McNiff on both of those places as well. But you're more likely to see content from the Long Take Review. I did take some surreptitious screenshots of us recording to put up as a teaser for the eventual episode.
And you can find me at Subchakchai on Instagram and Threads also. I've been posting a lot about The Bear because that's been my TV watching for the past couple weeks, catching up on that.
What episode are you on?
I just watched season 2, episode 6.
Hell yeah, you did.
It was mind-blowing.
I have a friend who hated it, and I can't. It's so funny. It's so funny.
It's so good.
But we could talk off channel.
Okay. Yeah, if you haven't watched The Bear and you're looking for a TV show to watch, it's very stressful, but so well done. And you can also find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jinn. And mission accomplished? ? Until next time. Thank you for listening. You can follow The Long Take on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive reviews of films with Oscar buzz, as well as new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.